From luxury ice that can cost $10 per cube, to Africa's finest caviar, to the world's most expensive type of cinnamon. This is where Michelin-starred restaurants get their ingredients. Our first stop is New York City, where we learn how a former bartender created his own luxury ice cube business. This 300-pound block of ice is about to be turned into luxury ice cubes. 100-weight ice sells them to Michelin-star restaurants across New York City. They can cost up to $10 each, and last year, the company sold over 3 million of them.
We're the first business in the world to focus exclusively and primarily on producing, fabricating, and delivering ice for beverages.
Richard Boccato started the business back in 2011. He used to be a bartender and started making his own custom cubes. Customers started begging him to sell cubes directly to them. Now he has over 300 clients across New York. The process starts by filling up these large chambers with filtered tap water.
New York City's finest tap water. Everybody knows we make the best bagels and the best ice in New York City because of the water.
These machines are the same ones that ice sculptors use and cost around $9,000 each. They have specialized pumps that circulate the water, pushing out any impurities or air bubbles that could cloud the ice. It takes up to 3 days for this 300-pound block to freeze. Then they start sawing. They use a butcher's bandsaw to cut the slabs down into smaller pieces. On a typical day, they'll cut over 10,000 cubes. Raimundo Duran is one of 15 employees working for Richard. He's been here since 5 a.m., sawing cubes in near freezing temps.
You know, the research says you stay in the colder longer, the younger you look. You wear the proper attire, you don't feel it. You know, I have 2 jackets on, 2 pairs of sweatpants. I've been working in a fridge for about 4 years now. You know, it becomes a habit to come in and not really feel anything.
The final step is to cut the ice into its correct shape. Its most popular cut is a clear 2x2 inch cube, which typically goes for 60 cents each. Custom cubes with engravings or flowers inside start at $1.80 per cube. Spheres start at $3. They're harder to make because they're carved one at a time with a custom machine, and they melt more slowly. The most expensive ice of all usually includes a combination of elements, like a unique shape plus engraving. That can cost as much as $10 a piece. Next, workers package and load them into climate-controlled delivery trucks. In a typical week, they deliver 20,000 pounds of ice to clients.
It's like playing Tetris, it literally is. In terms of me like trying to maximize, you know, all the space in the van. I pretty much know like every single corner, what specific bags I can fit on, how many on this shelf, how many on that shelf. It's something that definitely keeps me entertained.
The Michelin-starred Musket Room buys more than 100 cubes a week from Richard's business.
To maintain a Michelin star for 11 years, you have to like really care about every part of the experience. And that goes from service to what we're serving to people. Our kitchen really values getting the quality, like seasonal ingredients. And we really care about that behind the bar too. Because the bigger the cube, the slower it's gonna melt. When you're designing a cocktail, you think a lot about dilution before and dilution during the experience of the cocktail. So having good draft ice and good ice to serve cocktails on is really crucial. The benefit of buying ice from the hundredweight is you get a really clear and really perfect cube. That's very hard to do on your own. So it helps really like simplify and saves us a lot of time.
Richard says he'd like to expand his business beyond New York, but for now, he's content.
I think that in a city of 8.2 million people that I've always called home, this is more than enough.
Next, we head to California, where sea urchins are harvested by hand for Michelin-Starred restaurants.
About 20,000 pounds of sea urchins are delivered to this Santa Barbara factory each week. But it's not until you crack open the spiky shells that you see what makes sea urchins so valuable: the gonads. Just one 200-gram tray of urchin gonads like this can cost $100, and some in Japan can sell for over 5 times that. Sea urchins are one of the few seafoods still hand-harvested by divers today, and in recent years, masses of them have taken over the seabeds of California. So why are there so many urchins? And how, despite this seemingly huge supply, are they still so expensive? Sea urchin, or uni, is a prized delicacy in several parts of the world. Today, the yellow-orange gonads are often served in sushi, and even right out of the shell. Hundreds of urchin species exist, but only a select few are coveted food, including the red sea urchin here in Santa Barbara. Known as California gold, these gonads are prized because they're large, buttery, and sweet from the kelp they eat. To find gonads like this, divers need to collect individual sea urchins by hand. Michael Robertson has been diving for urchins for 15 years. He starts his days early, sailing out before the sun rises. It takes him and his crew about 2.5 hours to reach a good diving spot.
See that little island up there? That's called B Rock. That's where we're going. So all this green right here on top of this red, that's reef, is vegetation. That's a good thing. That lets us know it's not sand and it's just not bare rock. If there's vegetation, maybe there's urchins.
Michael looks for abundant kelp forests to help him decide where to dive. More kelp typically means better quality urchins.
2010, on a good day, a diver could harvest maybe up to 2,000 pounds a day of good quality sea urchins. Now the divers are typically coming in with about 300 to 500 pounds a day, so a quarter of the amount.
But surprisingly, parts of California's seabeds are full of urchins.
If they wanted to, they could still bring in 2,000 pounds a day. There's a lot of sea urchins out there, but there's a lack of kelp. So even if you bring in 2,000 pounds, if they're not marketable, then we don't harvest them.
If you want to compare how it was to how it is, this was solid kelp from here all the way in, all the way down. And now you have just little pockets here and there.
That lack of kelp impacts the value of red sea urchins. It also strains the ocean's ecosystem and the species that rely on kelp forests for habitat. Along with warming waters and pollution in recent decades, a certain sea urchin is to blame. Sea urchins can survive for years without eating, even without gonads. And after the decline of sea stars, one of its predators, in 2013, the purple sea urchin population exploded, consuming more than 95% of California's kelp forests as it grew. Purple urchins are smaller and produce fewer gonads, so there's little commercial demand for them. And as purple urchins multiply and eat more kelp, red urchins with good gonads become harder for divers to find. Finding the right spot to dive is just the first challenge. Getting your hands on these spiky creatures is the main one.
Some people wonder if sea urchin diving is a dangerous occupation. It can be as dangerous as you allow it. If you don't keep really tight tabs on your gear and the mechanics of your boat, it could easily kill you.
To make the job easier, Michael and his partner Fred need specific tools.
So this is the one essential piece of equipment everybody has to have. It's called a rake. It's custom made. Everybody's has their own take on how they like to have it done. I've got all these fancy colors on mine because if I ever drop it, I'll be able to see it on the bottom. And my daughter loves putting the tape on.
Once they're suited up, Michael and Fred head to the bottom and begin collecting urchins one by one.
All right.
Even with the proper gear, a good dive is never a guarantee. Typically, there are only about 5 gonads inside each urchin. And without enough kelp for the urchins to feed on, the gonads start to shrivel up. In some cases, an urchin will be totally empty inside.
We do crack urchins on the bottom so that we can see what we're picking, if there's enough product inside, and what the color's like inside.
To make things more challenging, Michael can only harvest urchins at least 3 1/4 inches in size.
You can't just go out and pick empty urchins. So there's a lot more empty urchins than there is beautiful, packed urchins that you want to sell. Depending on what they're eating, depends on the grade of the urchins. We got lucky on that one.
Oh, right on. Sounds good. Okay, cool, man. See you on the inside there.
After a 12-hour day to the islands and back, Michael returns with 750 to 900 pounds of urchins. The shelf life of fresh urchins is short, so they need to be delivered to processors that same night. By 4 a.m., Gene Damachi's team is already cracking and cleaning each one by hand.
And today we probably have about 10,000 sea urchins to go through.
The gonads are extremely fragile, and they only stay fresh for about a week. Workers crack each urchin down the middle to avoid breaking any of the gonads inside. Then it's time for one of the most crucial parts of this process, cleaning the gonads. This stage requires sharp attention to detail. If workers don't totally remove the intestines inside the urchin, the gonads degrade faster. And if any of the gonads rip during this process, they immediately drop in value.
If the gonad breaks, then it drops a grade or two. And when it goes from an A++ grade and we have to drop it down to B grade, the value is maybe about a quarter of what it could have been.
Workers then sort the gonads by color, making sure each tray has a uniform shade of yellow or orange. After they've packed each wooden tray, they use tweezers to inspect each gonad again, and gently remove any remaining kelp, shells, or spines. The most valuable gonads make up the A++ grade. Gene sells a 200-gram premium tray like this for $100. These uni are bright yellow or orange and come only from the sweeter male urchins. They're primarily sent to restaurants. But Gene doesn't come by this quality of gonad often. He typically only finds 1 premium gonad out of every 100 urchins. Sea urchin gonads weren't always valuable food in the US, particularly in the 70s, just before Gene's father opened Tradewind.
The government used to ask the divers, the local divers, to smash them, kill them at the time, until a Japanese person came along and said, no, this is actually a delicacy in Japan. And after many trials and errors, we also found out that Santa Barbara sea urchin is actually really, really good, like one of the best in the world.
Santa Barbara urchin was traditionally shipped to Japan until economic collapse stalled things in the mid-90s. Fortunately for Gene's family and other US producers, a sushi boom took off in the US around the same time.
Those of us that was able to make the transition from the Japanese market into the US domestic market survived at the time.
Today, Gene ships his product across the US.
Uni is one of the few seafood out there that they really haven't perfected farming yet. Until somebody figures that out, uni is probably going to be a limited, highly sought after item.
This ultimately raises the price of rare premium gonads.
This year, we're actually seeing a good quality, high quality uni that we haven't seen in about a decade. We're seeing a lot more colder waters, We're starting to see kelp grow back where it hasn't grown back in the last 10 years.
Only 1% of Japan's soy sauce is made through the traditional method of barrel aging, and you can find it in just a few Michelin restaurants around the world.
What makes the soy sauce special is the wooden barrel, called kiyoke. One can last for over a century. Yasuo makes bamboo strips to wrap around the barrel because the saltiness of the soy sauce can corrode metal.
こういう竹だと塩分にも強いので100年持ちます。
It takes at least 3 people to assemble one barrel. But not many do this anymore. After modern machinery took over the market, almost all kiyoke makers in Japan went out of business. So Yasuo learned to make his own.
ここから今からきれいにします。きれいにお化粧する感じですね。
Before these barrels are put to use, crushed wheat and steamed soybeans are mixed with koji, the fungus that will kickstart the fermentation process. This giant vat regulates temperature so the fungus can grow. After 2 days, the mixture goes to the Moromi house. This is where the wooden barrels help create the breeding ground for the bacteria.
お醤油を発酵させる菌の住処になるんですよ。
Over 1 ton of the soybean mixture fills each barrel, along with salt water. While Yasuo and his team stir, the soybeans bump up against each other and create tiny tears so that other bacteria can get in and start to break them down. The workers pump air into the barrel to make the aerobic yeast more active. Even though Yasuo says the microbes do most of the work, his part of the job is still demanding.
大変体力的にきついです。一番大変だった時は2ヶ月で9キロ痩せました。これ大変やなと思ってもおもろいなと思うと。
He checks on the soybeans every day to see if they need mixing. And based on their scent and appearance, he can tell where they are in the process.
私の経験上うちの場合最初リンゴの香りがするんですよ。その次にバナナの香りがする。
The soybeans will ferment here for at least a year and a half. Yasuo has 87 barrels in different phases. He believes a good barrel is one that will outlive him.
この桶で、だいたい今150年ぐらい使ってます。
These types of barrels have been in production in Japan since at least the 17th century. But everything changed during World War II, when materials became more scarce and expensive in Japan. The government knew its people couldn't live without their staple seasoning. So they ordered factories to make production cheaper and faster, cutting the process from years to months. So while many brewers expanded and modernized, small businesses like Yasuo's families could barely keep up.
なのでうちはタンクも買えない近代化の工場に出資できないお金がないので。
Yasuo stepped in 2003, just before his father suddenly became sick and had to retire. So he had to take over and pull a struggling business out of debt. He also had to teach himself a lot of the process, like how to use the press. After a year and a half of fermentation, Yasuo pipes the soybean mixture into this machine. He layers on a piece of traditional wrapping cloth. Then the machine slowly squeezes out the soy sauce over 10 days.
最初は自分の重さで自然に醤油が垂れていく。で毎日少しずつ重ねていくとまた上の重さが加わるのでじわっと絞れてきて。
Some industrial factories press it all at once. But Yasuo says getting a quality product is all about patience. After this stage, some of the soy sauce goes back into the barrel with more soybeans and wheat for 2 more years to make Yasuo's main product, saishikomi, a darker, stronger tasting soy sauce. When the microbes have enough time to naturally ferment the soybeans, it gives the soy sauce a sweeter aftertaste. Some industrial brands mimic this by adding sweeteners.
でうちのお醤油の場合は、無添加で何も入ってないですけど最初若干 塩味がきますけど、あとじわーっとね塩味が消えて甘みになるんです。
That balanced umami flavor is what chefs like Hitoshi Kishimoto are after. He's been running his restaurant Koyomi in Shotoshima for 5 years. For almost every dish, he cooks with naturally fermented soy sauce, including Yasuo's brand.
その時の熱意っていうのが多分味にも栄えてる反映してるなと思って、で今回はだいたい5種類のお醤油を使ってそのバランスを取ります。それを組み合わせることで一つのものができるというのがすごく面白い味付けになると思うので、この場合はとても大切にしています。日本人にとって醤油というのがとても身近で親しみやすい昔からの馴染みの味だということがなくなって回っては困るし。
In order for traditional soy sauce to continue, barrel production needs to keep up. That's why Yasuo holds barrel making workshops every year.
でうちで職人を育成する。で世界中の人たちに本物を味わってもらう。
He sells his authentic soy sauce to people all over the world. A bottle goes for $35 on Amazon, around triple the price of a commercial alternative.
でもやっぱりそのこう本当に美味しい記憶で作ったお醤油がゼロになるって本物がなくなることじゃないですか。
For Yasuo, passing down the legacy of barrel-aged soy sauce is part of his life's mission.
私その駅伝だと思ってるんですよ。この蔵と桶とこの金の生態系と次の息子の代に渡すのが私の仕事。孫やひ孫が袴に来た時にあのじいさん何言い出したか桶作るって言ったから俺ら桶も作れるし醤油も作れるなって言ったら嬉しいでしょ。だからやるんですよ。
This is the first caviar produced in Africa. From the highlands of Madagascar, the company Assapenser harvests 10 tons of the expensive fish eggs a year. In 2009, French entrepreneurs took a massive gamble, building a luxury industry in one of the world's poorest countries.
Tout le monde s'est moqué de nous et nous a pris pour des faux. Oui. Les eaux sont tout simplement trop chaudes.
Huge sturgeon farms in China and Europe dominate the market, producing most of the world's caviar. But the company's founders were determined to raise fish for their black gold in the country they had called home since the 1990s.
Nous sommes à plus de 20 millions d'euros d'investissement, c'est colossal.
Now their products are making their way into Michelin-Starred kitchens in Europe. So how did Assapenser convince Malagasy locals on a luxury industry? And how did they get customers from around the world to take a chance on African caviar? Traditional caviar can only come from sturgeon. They're native to the northern hemisphere. Many of the most popular species come from the Caspian Sea, where waters can be much colder than Madagascar's.
Dans les autres endroits de Madagascar, les côtes de Madagascar étaient tout à fait inadaptées à l'élevage d'esturgeons parce que les eaux auraient été bien trop chaudes.
That's why the founders raised their fish in Lake Montesua, about 1,400 meters above sea level. The team spent months crossing thousands of miles in search of temperate waters like this. The lake rarely tops 25 degrees Celsius, and it gave this farm an advantage. While sturgeon in the Caspian Sea might grow slower during cold winters and hot summers, the company says fish here mature year-round, thanks to these moderate temperatures.
À Madagascar, on peut dire qu'on a 3 ans d'avance sur les croissances, sur la performance, et 3 ans d'avance aussi sur le caviar.
The whole process starts in the hatchery, where they care for thousands of baby fish until they're mature enough for the lake. Sturgeon are notoriously tricky and expensive to raise. Compared to other farm fish, like salmon, sturgeon need a long time to grow. They can take a decade to mature, while a salmon only needs 3 years. So operating a sturgeon farm could cost 5 times more than a salmon one. But the team's first hurdle was keeping the fertilized sturgeon eggs alive along thousands of miles to Madagascar. They failed 4 times, trying to import them from France and Russia. But the 5th time was the charm. The company imported 35,000 healthy sturgeon eggs back in 2013.
Les gens se moquaient de nous, clairement.
That's Delphine Dabazi, one of Assapencer's founders.
Et même les plus grands experts nous ont tous déconseillé de nous lancer dans ce projet faux. C'est que le 26 juin 2017, le jour de la première production du premier poisson, que nous nous sommes dit qu'il y avait une chance que ça fonctionne.
Nearly a decade later, they've grown their fish population to over 60,000. And they raise 6 different species, one of which was thought to be extinct. Only female sturgeon produce caviar, so once they're big enough, the team separates them by sex.
Avec l'aspect extérieur du poisson, on ne peut pas déterminer le mâle de la femelle. Donc du coup, on est obligé d'utiliser un échographe.
The females head to the farm. With 16 hectares of pens, the fish have room to move.
Comme dans tout élevage surdensitaire est voué à l'apparition d'agents pathogènes. Donc au plus on réduit la densité, plus on limite ce risque.
That's Dijon Mustard. He's the farm's breeding manager.
Donc au maximum, on ne va pas dépasser 25 km².
They use 3 nets to contain the fish in the pens. One where the fish live, an extra net in case they escape, and a net on top to hold back birds. 10 full-time weavers make and mend the nets on site. It takes 31 miles of rope and a month of weaving to make just one net. Assapencer has hired and trained 300 Malagasy workers. The company says it pays 3 times the minimum wage.
Tena hita nisy fivanon tao sena tokantranonay mampivoatra ny tsena na afahanay very da ny zanakay afaka miana.
A team heads out to feed the fish 5 days a week. First, crews test the water. When there's enough oxygen, they can start adding feed.
Alohan'ny ame sakafo dia lemana sakafo mba tsy hitsingevana dia afangaro tsara. Dia aparitaka tao ampovoany tsara mba tivoaka ivelany. Dia hohanina ny ba. Dia hohanina ny paille. Dia ariana ato anaty kazy.
That's how the food will sink to the bottom, where the sturgeon eat. The company produces about 60 tons of feed a month, made from a base of fish meal and vegetable meal, like soybean or rice bran, yeast, and water. If the fish aren't fed the right thing, Dijon says they could take twice as long to grow.
Donc d'où l'importance d'avoir un aliment sur mesure par rapport à son espèce.
Et je vais dire que ce qui coûte le plus cher dans l'exploitation, c'est la production de l'aliment du poisson.
The company spends over $130,000 a month on feed alone. Assapencer makes the food on site and sources about 80% of its ingredients from farms nearby.
Ça a développé toute une économie locale en fait. Il y a les paysans, il y a les épiceries.
Donc ça c'est le tuto de soja. Ça c'est local.
Arimonda manages the feed mill. His team grinds all the raw materials into powder. Machines then cook and shape the feed into granules. The recipe and size of the pellets change based on the age of the fish.
Plus le poisson est jeune, plus il a besoin d'énergie. Plus le poisson est jeune, plus il a besoin de protéines et de lipides.
Feed is such a big expense for Assapencer because the fish eat so much of it.
De 4. Donc ça veut dire que la femelle a besoin de 4 kg de granulés pour produire 1 kg de poisson.
Indro, maraina de après-midi, amuru.
While the sturgeon feed, there's always a diver watching below the surface to see how quickly the fish eat and how deep they go. Every few months, Dijon's team pulls fish out of the water. He checks for roe in the sturgeon using this ultrasound machine. These fish were born in 2017.
Et tous les points noirs et blancs, ce sont du caviar.
He measures the roe to help determine which fish need more time to develop their eggs. They isolate the fish that need a few more years to mature. These females are Persian sturgeon. They'll spend the last few weeks of their lives in cold pools.
Qui va permettre en fait d'arrêter le métabolisme de la femelle et d'avoir une très bonne qualité des œufs. Cette étape elle est très importante parce que c'est l'étape qui va nous permettre d'enlever les mauvais ducs que le caviar peut avoir s'il y en a.
These species can be harvested young, at only 7 years old.
Une fois qu'on a abattu les femelles, on va faire la saignée et on va les rincer jusqu'à ce qu'il n'y ait plus aucune goutte de sang qui sorte du poisson.
This sturgeon weighs 16 kilos, but they can go up to 20.
Justo ang tanan na ru. Iya to ani para niya dua to kayak ni baba niya tun tanan na raya. Daya to para niya bat. Sumari sistema mafis pa. Sumar mafis din. Ya dewa pita kata natin feed or like KVP.
The valuable roe makes up about 1/4 of its body weight. Mandim bin Salama worked as a cook before joining Asapenser.
Tiwamni sudah atur ni nago paning tikin ditaida. Tegeba satu-satu nayan desa kui lasa ya kerja damu sedikit nayan bet.
But the roe isn't finished caviar just yet. Workers run the eggs over a sieve to separate them from the fish's innards. Then they wash the eggs to remove any leftover bits. These workers spread the roe out so they can see any misshapen or discolored eggs that need to be removed. Now they race against the clock to salt the roe in a minute.
Pourquoi 60 secondes? Parce que si on le fait plus, ça risque de ramollir les œufs.
Any less time, and the eggs won't have a consistent salty taste. The salt, along with 4 months of aging in these fridges, helps develop the caviar's nutty flavor. A kilo of Rova caviar can go for over $5,000. The cost is on par with European brands. Asapenser exports 90% of its caviar to Europe, but it's up against stiff competition. China is Europe's biggest supplier. It raises sturgeon on massive farms like this one, 3,500 times larger than Asapenser's. Since 2014, China has been selling the most expensive caviar, the kind harvested from beluga sturgeons, seen here at a farm in Florida. But Asapenser is still years away from harvesting its first beluga roe, because it takes nearly double the amount of time to raise the high-priced fish compared to other sturgeon species.
On ne sait pas encore combien on va produire en vitesse de croisière. La vitesse de croisière, ce sera à partir de 2026, 2027 ou 2028, quand nos belugas commenceront à bien produire le caviar.
Until then, Asapenser is trying to sell the caviar types that are ready. The company has opened offices in Paris, Brussels, and New York City in hopes of hooking Western markets on African caviar. The team has already managed to convince chefs at some of Europe's top restaurants.
Vraiment splendide. Faire découvrir des produits comme ça à nos clients, c'est splendide.
Boris Campanella is the executive chef of Le Crine, a Michelin-starred restaurant. He was one of the first chefs in Paris to put Rova on the menu, back in 2019.
C'est-à-dire que j'ai pas entendu parler, elle est venue me voir un jour, je crois que c'était il y a 3-4 ans, elle est venue me voir dans la cuisine. Elle m'a présenté un caviar, déjà elle a ouvert la boîte. Je dis pas grand-chose, je goûte. Le produit incroyable, un goût, une teneur en bouche, la dureté des œufs, enfin la couleur, enfin tout. Je dis mais comment vous faites pour faire un truc pareil?
He's topped dishes of torched shrimp, lamb tartare, and ceviche with Rova caviar.
J'aime mettre un plat dans le menu avec du caviar.
Like this dish of abalone with brown butter.
Ça c'est de la groseille de mer. Mais on l'annonce à chaque fois qu'on arrive à la table, on annonce caviar de Madagascar. Donc forcément, ça interpelle. Ah, qu'est-ce que vous avez dit, chef? Caviar d'où? Je connais pas, il faut du caviar Madagascar, mais incroyable.
And Boris isn't the only chef who's stocked these tins. About 15 restaurants across Europe now serve Rova. The company's success abroad has allowed it to invest back into Madagascar. Assepenser started by training locals, like Tafitasoa Ediarivoni
Tia narefany orinasa nanao formation
and Menchka.
Niasa talohan'ny orinasa mbola tsy teto aloha dia betsaka ny ankizy teto Mantasoa mbola tsy anasa. Dia rehefa nisy le société mipetraka teto dia manodidina zato ny mpiasa avy ao Mantasoa, lasa manana asa ato amin'ny Assepenser.
Au départ, on avait beaucoup d'expatriés du monde entier. Et à aujourd'hui, petit à petit, ce sont les Malgaches qui ont remplacé les expatriés.
Satria mponina avy ao Mantasoa, izay tsy nalalininina momba ny Urchin no niakatra lasa cadre dia tena faly be mihitsy.
The company provides rent-free housing for its workers. The housing site also has a grocery store, a mini theater, and a gym.
Nous, on prépare les repas du personnel, à peu près 300 personnes par jour.
That includes 3 meals a day. Most of the employees' food is grown on site.
L'idée est de tirer Madagascar vers le haut et de le sortir un petit peu de sa pauvreté. Et je trouve que plus on fera des produits de luxe à Madagascar, plus on aidera le pays à se développer.
This small region in Italy is the only place in the world that makes authentic Parmigiano Reggiano cheese. Here's how it gets from Italy to restaurants worldwide.
The very first producers of Parmesan cheese were monks over 1,000 years ago. Then, like now, Parmesan wheels were made with only 3 ingredients: cow milk, salt, and rennet. There are only 329 dairies in the whole world that are certified to produce Parmesan cheese, and they are all based in the same area where the monks used to make it. In fact, it isn't even possible to make the exact same product outside of the production area. And why is that? Turns out, it's all about 3 good bacteria that only grow in this specific territory.
Tutta la logica nella filiera di produzione del Parmigiano Reggiano è trasferire questi batteri dall'erba alla forma di conservazione dell'erba, il fieno, dal fieno alla mangiatoia, dalla mangiatoia attraverso le tecniche di allevamento degli animali al latte, e una volta che sono nel latte, nel casificio, si cerca di farli crescere per permettere la loro presenza dentro la forma del Parmigiano Reggiano. Se loro ci sono, fermentano le componenti del latte negli aromi, profumi e sapori tipici del Parmigiano.
It takes 131 gallons of milk to make 1 wheel of Parmesan cheese. That's whole milk. Dairies combine freshly milked whole milk with day-old skim milk to make the cheese. The 2 milks are transferred in these copper vats along with fermented whey, a sort of sourdough, and then rennet, an enzyme which gives the milk a yogurt-like texture. The cheese master will then split the milk into curds using this tool called spino.
Il casaro deve trasformare questa consistenza in una consistenza più gommosa, perché dobbiamo togliere acqua, visto che dobbiamo fare un formaggio a lunga stagionatura. E inizia quindi la fase della cottura e in 5 minuti si passa dalla temperatura di 38 gradi centigradi a 55 gradi centigradi.
Together with changing the cheese texture, cooking the milk does another essential job. Do you remember the 3 good bacteria? Well, they're not alone. Other bacteria, bad bacteria, might have joined the party. Cooking the milk ensures that only the good bacteria can continue the journey, while the others are kicked out. When cooked, the curd travels all the way to the bottom of the vat, where it's left to settle. 45 minutes later, here it is, a compact mass of curd, weighing 220 pounds. This mass is the equivalent of 2 cheese wheels and is split carefully by workers with linen clothes. Each half is then transferred into molds.
Ogni 2 ore questo telo viene cambiato e l'operazione è: si toglie il peso sopra questa massa, si cambia il telo, si gira la forma. Questo ogni 2 ore fino alla sera, alle ore 20.
At 8 p.m., the cheese is covered with this stencil, which will engrave the logo Parmigiano Reggiano. These dots are the mark of origin used to tell customers that this is the real thing, made in the same restricted area where monks used to live in the Middle Ages. Each wheel is also given an ID. It's this plaque, made from milk protein, which contains information about where it was produced and when. The stencil is removed 4 days later, and the wheels are pressed into brines, where they stay completely plunged for about 19 days. This process helps to form the cheese rind, which acts as a barrier for the cheese. And this is when the maturation process begins. Wheels remain relatively untouched for 1 year. After that, a master grader will inspect them and brand them. The average maturation is 2 years, but some wheels are aged as long as 10 years to achieve a stronger, nuttier taste. A longer maturation period makes the price go higher. That's why a Stravecchio, very old Parmesan, that has matured for 3 years will be sold on the market for an average of 13 euros. That's about $15 per pound. This high price means that there is now a black market of counterfeit Parmesan products. Italy has been struggling with fake products for years. In fact, the problem is so big that the fakes have become an industry of their own that is estimated to be worth 100 billion euros. That's about 113 billion US dollars. with Parmigiano Reggiano being one of the biggest brands fighting copycats. While the cheese is protected in the European Union under the Protected Designation of Origin scheme, it is still struggling to get the recognition it deserves in the rest of the world.
Fuori l'Unione Europea e fuori quei paesi che non fanno parte di accordi bilaterali dove quindi viene riconosciuta la normativa europea, il problema è veramente molto grande, il problema è veramente molto serio. Infatti, al di là di poter proteggere il termine Parmigiano Reggiano attraverso un'operazione di deposito del marchio, in tanti paesi, in quasi tutti i paesi del mondo, il termine Parmigiano Reggiano è un trademark, però è possibile utilizzare in tanti paesi del mondo il termine Parmesan, quindi mettendo in confusione il consumatore finale che pensa di acquistare il vero Parmigiano Reggiano acquistando un Parmesan. Lì il problema è veramente molto grande e si sta lavorando a livello governativo.
So, how do you recognize a real Parmesan cheese? Do you remember this dotted stencil? That's a solid indication that the cheese is legit. If that's not visible, the packaging should contain Parmigiano Reggiano's official logo and the EU's Protected Designation of Origin.
Iberian ham is the world's most expensive cured meat, and it's served at Michelin-Starred restaurants across the globe.
The reason why it's so prestigious is actually standing behind me. I don't know if you can see, but there are some pigs behind me, and they are of this special breed called the black Iberian pigs. During their life, they feed mostly on acorns, which are very, very present in the Sierra here, and that's what gives this ham such a special flavor. So today we're going to visit a ham factory to learn more about how the actual ham is made, and then we're going to talk about how it's cut, how it's served, and taste it to see why it is so special. Black Iberian pigs descend from wild boars and have been considered a delicacy since long before our times. In the year 77, Roman writer Pliny the Elder praised their superior quality. In 1493, when he sailed across the Atlantic for the second time, Christopher Columbus had Iberian pigs aboard his caravels. The most expensive of them all sells for 4,100 euros, which is over $4,500. But despite the high price, this ham remains a local favorite. Black Iberian pigs can be found in the southern and western regions of the Iberian Peninsula, which comprises Spain and Portugal. In Spain, Iberian ham production is confined to the provinces of Salamanca, Huelva, Córdoba, Cáceres, and Badajoz. Portugal also produces it under the name Presunto Ibérico. Spanish Iberian ham is protected by the EU's Protected Designation of Origin. The 5 Spanish provinces where it is produced are split into 4 different protected designations of origin. Out of the total production of Iberian ham, only 6% comes with a black label, indicating it's the 100% Iberian pure breed. Iberian pigs are raised in an ecosystem known as the Dehesa.
Es una zona muy quebrada, mucha sierra, difícil de acceso. Animales que se criaban son muy duros, se crían con tiempo malo, con mucho frío y con las inclemencias de la sierra, pero a su vez da mucho aporte energético, mucho rendimiento.
The pigs live in the wild, roaming freely in the Dehesa. Per regulations, there shouldn't be more than 2 pigs per hectare of grassland. The Dehesa is rich in olives, nuts, and berries, but especially in acorns, called bellotas in Spanish, which are rich in nutrients and fatty acids, basically a superfood for pigs.
El cerdo ibérico proviene directamente del jabalí, entonces son cerdos que tienen mucha más masa muscular y menos grasa. Al echar en libertad, toda esa grasa está dentro del músculo y no se queda en la parte de fuera de la carne.
So after learning all about the black Iberian pig and why it's such a special pig and different from any other breed, we are at a local company here in Cortegana, Lazo, to find out about the making process of the hams. Ham comes from the rear leg of the pig. Most companies would also cure the front leg, called paleta, and use the rest of the meat for other products, like chorizo. Lazo stores over 150,000 legs in its cellars. Some of the hams made here come from an even rarer breed of the Iberian pig, the Manchado de Jabugo, which has black patches on its skin and can only be found in the Sierra de Huelva. The pigs are killed when they're 15 months old. The hams and paletas are then buried in salt for 15 to 20 days, depending on weight.
Eso es lo que hace secar la pieza y mantenerla en su conservación, que la carne no se pudra, ¿no?
After salting, the process starts to gradually slow down. The legs spend about 2 months in a temperature-controlled room, then they are moved to an airy room for 6 to 9 months.
Donde de una forma natural, en la Sierra de Huelva, con unas temperaturas, unas condiciones climatológicas distintas a otros sitios, de forma natural el jamón suda, la grasa se funde y hace que coja los aromas, los bouquets, los aires de la sierra. Eso transformado después pasa todo al magro, que es la carne. La carne tiene una untuosidad, tiene unas características organolépticas completamente distintas a las de otras especies y a las de otra nutrición, a la otra alimentación.
The final stage of curing, and also the longest, is the one in cellars. On average, an Iberian ham needs a couple of years to reach its peak flavor, but some legs can cure for much longer.
Están más o menos tiempo en función de su peso, pero 2 años, 3 años, 4 años pasan aquí.
To get a better understanding of how Iberian ham is labeled on the market, we visited Productos de la Sierra, a shop in Seville that sources local products from Andalucía and no farther than 250 kilometers.
Para el jamón ibérico hay 4 tipos de calidad que son representados con 4 colores. La máxima calidad es el color negro y es el jamón 100% ibérico de bellota. Eso quiere decir que la mamá y el papá del cerdo han sido 100% ibéricos de bellota y se ha criado en libertad alimentado con bellotas. Luego, la siguiente calidad es el color rojo, que sería que la mamá es 100% ibérica, pero el papá es duroc, que es otra raza de cerdo. Los cerdos que son criados en libertad pero no se han alimentado con bellotas es el cerdo verde, el precinto verde, que es el cebo de campo. Y luego hay otro estándar de calidad, que es el más bajo, que proviene de ganadería intensiva, que es el precinto blanco. How we know if it's a good ham? Needs to be, soft, and the fat needs to melt with a little bit of temperature, so it's a good one.
As with its origin and environment, Iberian ham is carved using a specific technique which can take a lot of time to learn.
El jamón ibérico se corta con un cuchillo largo, corto y muy flexible. Es muy importante cortar siempre en dirección del músculo para que el sabor de la grasa y la carne siempre permanezca en la misma dirección.
¿Cuáles son los retos de esta profesión?
Conseguir que tenga el máximo número de lonchas cada vez que cortas un jamón, y también hay la posibilidad de hacer bonitos diseños con la grasa y con las diferentes lonchas.
So this one is our jamón ibérico. This one is 100% ibérico, which is the highest grade. It's cut in like such a divine shape. I've never seen a ham cut like this. You're used to those like very long, just a bit sad slices. This one looks like kind of royal, and the room smells so nice. It smells so nice. And actually, before I try it, I just want to point out how shiny is this fat. So good. I have no words, my voice is gone. It's so good. It's not salty. Like, that's the thing that astonishes me every time that I have like a good quality ham or meat in general, that it doesn't taste like salt, even though it's the main stage of the production, of course. It's just nice and flavorful. Taste is nutty. Like, you can taste the corn in here. It really traces back to the actual pig that made this. It's really nice, and especially the fat, you should keep it. It's very nice and greasy, adds a bit more of a buttery texture, and the marbling as well, because these pigs are smaller than the usual pigs we're used to, and there is more muscles in their legs rather than fat. It's very, very tender, and it really has a different flavor compared to other hams.
This melon cost $200. But that's nothing compared to the price that some can reach. And in May 2019, 2 melons from Hokkaido sold at auction for 5 million yen. That's just over $45,000. So what is it that makes this fruit so expensive? From the Yubari King to the Andes, the Higo green melon and many more, melons are grown up and down Japan, and they're serious business. The fruit isn't traditionally something you'd pick up as a snack in Japan, but is a luxury that often plays a big part in Japan's gift-giving culture. And they're not just admired for their taste, but for their looks as well. Crown melons are one of the most renowned varieties. Go into a high-end fruit store in Tokyo, and you're likely to see their signature stickers. The melons are only grown in Shizuoka Prefecture in central Japan and can cost you over $200 each. Unlike the $5 mass-produced melons you're likely to come across in a Western supermarket, crown melons take constant care and attention to grow. Fumiyoshi Chujo's family has been growing these melons for 60 years at his farm near Fukuroi.
で、ここの静岡のメロンの特徴は、一つはこうベッドで作る。地面と切り離して作るのが一つ。それで、一年中収穫をして、夏でも冬でも味が同じようになるように、美味しい味になるようにこういうやり方をしてる。
The farmers give the melons constant attention and care. Each melon takes 100 days to grow, and the fruit is grown all year round. There are 20 slightly different varieties of crown melon seeds grown depending on the season. The raised beds allow the farmers to control the amount of water each plant gets exactly, and air conditioning and heating keep the temperatures constant year-round. Crown melons have 4 grades: Fuji, Yama, Shiro, and Yuki. Any melons with even minor defects are marked as Yuki. Then the top 3 grades are marked on their sugar content and perfect appearance. 55% of the melons make Shiro grade, the 3rd grade, 25% are Yama, and only 0.1%, or 1 in 1,000 of all melons harvested are graded as Fuji, the highest grade possible. After around 50 days, the plants begin to flower and baby fruits start to appear, but the hard work has only just begun.
木作りの時に他取っちゃって2本か3本交配を残すと。でもう1週間ぐらいするとこの3本のうちのこのポメロンが一番形がいい、傷がないそういうものを見つけて1つです。で1本の木に 1玉一番いいものしか残さずにして収穫する。これが最大の特徴だと思う。
This work is all done entirely by hand, and it isn't just about getting the taste right, but perfecting the appearance too. As the fruits get larger on each plant, they are carefully wrapped in white paper to protect them.
で、一般的なメロンは適当に、自然にネットが出るものをここは、こういうベッドの上で作って人工的に、玉の肥大をさせてネットを出すと。でこのネットの綺麗さによって、日本人は、値段もつける。急激な天候の変化でも大きく割れたり出なかったりっていうのを、手で水をかけてコントロールするのが一番難しくて、それがこの静岡のメロンの栽培の最大の難しい大変なところでもあるし、値段も高く出てくるもので、まあメロンだけれども芸術品にほぼ近い。
Once this net pattern has developed, each melon is even massaged and polished by hand. It is then covered to protect it from the sun for its final growing period. The farmers can wear through multiple pairs of white gloves polishing these melons.
Yeah, we have the reason why the melon is such expensive. So each farmer have to take care very carefully. You know that even the one mistake of amount of water on one day that makes the melon deteriorate. They have to take care every day, every time, and they take the weather, temperature, and they kind of talking with each melon trees, how they are, how they look each day, and they grow the melon like their sons or daughters.
But the work of the agricultural cooperatives also keeps their prices high. The Shizuoka Crown Melon Company oversee the distribution and checks on melons from over 200 farmers. They ensure that the quality remains high and that the prices aren't undercut. The resulting taste is undeniably incredible. Each fruit has a complex balance of flavours and is perfectly juicy and sweet. But you'll have to decide for yourself whether the high price is worth it for the taste. Despite the cost, there's a big market for these fruits across Japan. Consumers are willing to pay to ensure that their gift is perfect, especially knowing the work that has gone into producing them. The melons are often sold in individual presentation boxes, sitting on silk or hay or tied with a ribbon, and when choosing the perfect gift, the high price is often seen as a signifier of quality. So what about those $45,000 melons? At the start of the season, the perfect first fruits are auctioned off, and are often sought after as a trophy for local businesses to bid on. A new record is set for the sale of these fruits almost every year, and it doesn't look like their price is going down anytime soon.
Vanilla is the world's second most expensive spice.
Valeurany vanille izay hitantsika eto amin'ity toerany androany dia manodidina ny 2,380,000 euro.
And the East African island of Madagascar produces roughly 80% of the global supply. Here, farmers have to pollinate 40 million orchids that only bloom for one day a year.
Raha trena mafy izy dia lasa potsiky, simba, tsy lasa flera, tsy lasa gosy sy ny lavany.
Only then will a vanilla bean or pod grow. Inside are the seeds and oils used in popular desserts. But Madagascar is still one of the poorest countries in the world.
Volatility of the vanilla prices, this bust and boom, creates such a toxic environment there.
Farmers can earn more when the price of vanilla is high, but rampant inflation often follows, and the big bucks attract thieves, who attack farmers and steal crops. Today, farmers arm themselves to defend their vanilla.
Ny ologno mpamboly lavany koa fa very lavany zany efa ratsy ny fiainagnazy satria tsisy raha magnidy bola aminazy.
Farmers can plunge into extreme poverty when prices are low. The government has tried to stabilize the price, but it's backfired. And now global customers are turning to other countries for cheaper vanilla. As locals fight to protect Madagascar's green gold, they worry how much more they, the land, and this crop can take.
Isan'andro zany ny halaviran'ny lalagna imboako avy amin'ny tanàna mandeha amin'ny volanaha eo amin'ny 2 kilometra.
Raza Finsalama grew up on a vanilla farm, and 7 years ago he bought this hectare of land for himself. Vanilla is an orchid that grows on a vine.
Hitantsika eto zany ny fandehan'ny vahotry tahony lavany. Izy zany mandady mirorogno ambany.
And it grows best in this rainforest environment, where there's plenty of rain and sunlight. But vanilla isn't native to Madagascar. It's actually from 10,000 miles away, in Central and South America. Indigenous groups like the Totonacs and later the Aztecs cultivated native vanilla for centuries, thanks to this insect. Orchid bees are needed to pollinate a vanilla's flower, allowing a fruit, or that pod, to grow. After Hernan Cortes conquered the Aztecs, he brought vanilla back to Spain in the 1520s. It became popular across across Europe in desserts like ice cream, creme brulee, and sweetmeats, which Queen Elizabeth I loved. Except the Spanish still controlled the trade. So, hoping to get in on the market, other European countries tried cultivating vanilla on their own, but they didn't have that bee. So their vanilla vines wouldn't produce any fruit. Then in 1841, on the French-controlled island of Réunion, a 12-year-old boy figured out an answer. Edmond Albius discovered that the orchid could pollinate itself if he moved aside the membrane separating the male and female parts. Albius was born into slavery, but even after he was freed in 1848, he never made money off his discovery and died in poverty 32 years later. France took Albius's work and started growing vanilla on the French-ruled island right next door, Madagascar. It thrived here because the growing conditions were perfect. Today, in towns like Ras Al Fin Salamas, almost everyone works in the vanilla industry. And they still hand-pollinate every orchid, just like Albius did nearly 200 years ago. Each flower blooms for just one day a year.
Izy kofa haniry asa fleran'ny lavany, dia tsy maintsy fatsika ohatran'izao zegny ampiasaigna andeha haniriagna fleran'ny lavany. Raha atao meky zany fleur po mety ho simba. Tsy atao mafy izay. Vita zany ny fleur.
Ras Al Fin Salama works alone and can pollinate up to 500 orchids a day. It takes about 9 months for a pod to grow. The price of this vanilla bean has skyrocketed in recent years due to rising demand and the destruction of crops by cyclones. In 2018, vanilla hit a high of nearly $600 per kilo, more than the value of silver. It's since dropped to $250 a kilo, but that's still a lot. And those prices are really attractive to thieves.
Maharegny lavany lafo vidy, dia lasa mivadiky ny lohany mangalatra.
So many farmers in the region are arming themselves and patrolling their fields at night, when thieves usually strike. Thieves stole 20 kilograms of farmer Berlin Ronnery's harvest, leaving his vines bare.
Hanafika zareo amin'ny tegna miamby, voatiry ny tegna tafy mampiasa. Nanomboka tamin'tao zao, nizaha reto saboho sy ny basikily reto, ko indesiko iarovako ny tenako sy ny fanagnako.
In 2018, officials estimated 10% of the year's harvest was lost to theft.
Eto zany tragno anaha, tragno fambolagna fitaova, sady tsy ampiasagna lavany.
He often sleeps out here overnight.
Lasa miasa loha lava zany amin'ny fiambiasagna azy satria mpangalatra andeha handroba, andeha handrava. Tegna tsy tafandry mieritreritra azy.
And because farmers only get one vanilla harvest annually,
raha kafa very agnatin'ny taogno raiky, mijaly izy sahiragna, na ny hanigny hoanigny tegna ampanahiragna.
Some of the thieves are actually children, driven to steal because of poverty. They were held in overcrowded and unhygienic prisons in the northeast of the country for years without trial. Farmers have started branding their vanilla beans with identifying codes, making the crops easier to track if they do get stolen. Another protective measure? Some farmers pick their beans before they're completely ripe, to beat thieves to harvest.
And so the quality goes down a lot.
This year, Ras Al Fin Salama was able to wait until his beans were completely mature.
Mazava ho azy fô 15,000 gosy ny hitretiny ho azo.
Farmers have to move quickly because the pods start fermenting immediately once they're picked. They pack the vanilla pods in 40-pound bags. And haul the loads for miles along dirt roads to the market. Traditionally, middlemen, called commissionaires, bought these beans in their raw green state, and they held a lot of negotiating power over the farmers, since the beans spoiled quickly.
The middlemen are definitely making a lot more money. They can kind of tell people whatever price they want.
So some years, farmers walk away happy. In other years, they can barely make ends meet.
I have heard farmers say things like, you have to have courage to plant vanilla because it may not be worth it at the end. You may not get anything.
Nowadays, Raza Fin Salama sells his pods directly to a cooperative called Sahanala.
Manokana fa orinasany mpamboly lavany jiaby mikambagna ao agnatiny.
Sahanala representatives check the bean quality and the brand on the bean and pay the farmers directly in cash, cutting out the middleman and promising a consistent price. Today, Raza Fin Salama earned about $17 for a kilo of raw green vanilla. Sahanala takes the beans to one of its processing facilities, employing thousands of workers across Madagascar. But even these large operations still have to protect against thieves.
Raha ny valeuran'ny vanille izay hitantsika eto amin'ity toeran'ity androany dia manodidina ny 2 380 000 euro.
The facility has electric fences, surveillance cameras, and private security patrolling at night.
Anisany antony mahatonga zany fepetra rehetra zany noraisana iarovana ny lavania ny asarobidiny sy ny valeurany.
But it'll still be another 3 months of painstaking work before the vanilla is export ready. First, workers have to sort the beans by quality and size. Next, they wash each bean to remove any impurities. Then the beans get dunked in hot water to release the compound vanillin. That's what creates the distinct vanilla flavor. The beans need less than a minute, depending on how ripe they are. They have to run the bean baskets so they don't lose the heat from cooking. Workers move the cooked beans to boxes where they'll sit for 48 hours. When they take the beans out, they'll be brown.
Eto aorianako eto zany dia misy an'ireo ankizy izay mitatitra lavany izay handeha ho atapy amin'ny masoandro. Atapy ny vanille mba hahatonga ny humidité anazy mihena, hahatonga ny goût stable, ary ihany koa mba hahatonga ny hanitra ny lavania hivoaka tsara.
There, the beans will stay for 15 to 30 days, depending on the moisture inside.
Natsaka ny oranganiny kela niabayaba anongoko lavanila tamin'ny labasy. Tsy manjazy ka fa le tsy mety aminazy le manjary mozizika le.
Zareo zany manao triage manala le vanille tsy mitovy ny couleur anazy. Zany hoe misy tamin'le vanille somary masaka loatra nandrahoana dia iny mila alana mba tsy afaka.
In the packaging room, they massage the beans to release the oils and the vanilla fragrance. Careful not to damage the beans, they group the pods in bunches. Then they check that there are no stray metals, like nails, hidden inside. Workers then weigh the boxes. and package them for shipping.
Soit elle est vendue en bout, soit elle est extraite. Parce qu'aux États-Unis, la demande est très grande pour tout ce qui est pâtisserie.
Sahanala's vanilla beans end up with American-based food processor Archer Daniels Midland.
Le fait aujourd'hui de s'être associé en joint venture avec Archer Daniels Midland, on a plus vu notre production augmenter.
Exporters like Sahanala earn the biggest bucks. This cooperative has a turnover of $40 million annually. That's because cured beans are worth a lot more. Today, Sahanala earns $250 per kilo for its cured vanilla, a 1,300% increase from what farmer Razafin Salama made selling his raw beans.
The bigger problem is the volatility of the price.
Miakatra izy, lamigny kokoa zegny ny fiainana, raha mirorogno izy, vao may zegny sahirana zegny mitokan-trano.
In those low-price years, farmers live in extreme poverty. Like 81% of the country, many earn just $2 a day.
Vola azoko amin'ny lavany izy tsy tegna mahampy ny fiainana menakavy agnatin'ny taogno raiky.
So many farmers grow other crops, like vegetables and peanuts, to supplement their incomes.
Mamboly zaho, mamboly vary, dia magnano fompiagna madinidinika. Fô ny vidin'ny lavany ndraiky edy, ahafahako mamelogno zareo ara-tsakafo sy mampianatra zareo ary mitaha zareo amin'ny lafin'ny fahasalamagna ohatra ka marary.
During years of high prices, farmers, middlemen, and exporters would make more. But this also drives up inflation, making everything more expensive.
In the ideal world, vanilla would consistently get a good price.
To balance out the ever-changing price, in 2020, Madagascar's government introduced a minimum base price. Today, it's set at $250 a kilo for the exporter.
They want to protect against this crazy up and down, right?
But it hasn't gone to plan.
Unfortunately, it appears that most people are not going along with paying that minimum price.
Global companies are turning to other countries that sell at cheaper prices, or they're buying synthetic vanilla.
A lot of this depends so much on the government of Madagascar and whether they will change tactics and go back to allowing their price to more accurately reflect the global price.
Farmers are betting on cooperatives like Sahanala to alleviate the need the government can't fill. Sahanala can guarantee that its farmers make $17 a kilo, at least $2,600 a year.
Zay ahafahany miasa, ahafahany magnano fampandrosoagna aty amin'ny tany misy zahay zegny ivola io.
But as they face theft, an unreliable government, and shifting demand, farmers at the center of the industry are unsure of what's next.
Demand for vanilla is continuously increasing. And so if Madagascar could find some stability, and if these farmers could find some stability, that there's no reason for the outlook to not be really, really good for vanilla in Madagascar. But, it's hard to say what the future brings.
Even in the expensive world of spices, saffron stands out. And real saffron can cost you over $10,000 per kilogram. Sought after for thousands of years as a spice, a dye, and a medicine, you need over 150 flowers to make just 1 gram of saffron. And the stuff you have at home in the cupboard could well be fake. So just what makes this spice so expensive? Saffron is the red stigma of the Crocus sativus. Each crocus has 3 small stigmas that have to be picked carefully by hand. This minuscule harvest means that the amount you get from each flower is roughly 0.006 grams. No machine can do the delicate work required to harvest these thin threads, and it can take 40 hours of hard manual labour to produce just 1 kilogram of high quality saffron. Growing the plants isn't exactly easy either.
They're actually called corms, but they're like a bulb, basically, like a flower bulb. So the more flowers per bulb you can get, and the bigger the flowers, really, and that all depends on how you look after it, how you grow it, the climate. So, for example, if it rains just before harvest, we get bigger flowers. If it's very dry just before harvest, the flowers are smaller. So you look after the crop during the year by hand, and you pick the flowers by hand, and you process the flowers by hand.
Once the crop starts flowering, harvesters have to work fast to make sure they can pick it all in time. Almost all of the saffron planted can flower within 1 week of the year, and to maintain the quality, the flowers are best picked first thing in the morning. Quality is key when growing such a precise crop, and the taste of the saffron depends on the rainfall, temperature and soil. Kashmir is famed for producing some of the highest quality saffron in the world.
तो ये जो पूरे कश्मीर वादी में जो है ये रेड सॉइल जो है ज़्यादातर यही पाई जाती है, और ये जो है ये सैफरान की रेड सॉइल जो है ये एक कुदरती तौर से एक फर्टिलाइज्ड लैंड होती है। जैसे कि अभी हम जा रहे हैं किसी और इलाके में, वहाँ की जो लैंड उस पर काफ़ी ज़्यादा मेहनत करनी पड़ती है, राइट। उसमें जो है कंपोजिशन या कुछ ऐसे डालने पड़ते हैं, लेकिन ये जो रेड सॉइल है इसमें ये एक अंदरूनी मजबूत होती है, क्योंकि ये इसको अल्लाह ताला ने कुदरत की तरफ से, और ये जो है ये काफ़ी फेमस है in all over the world.
And that small strand of saffron that you harvest as a result of all of this work? Well, to get the highest grades, you might need to throw half of it away. The most expensive, highest grade saffron is generally made up of just the very tips of the stigma. In Iran, where over 90% of the world's saffron is produced, there are 4 grades. The lowest grade is the bunch. That's the entire strand that's pulled from the flower, from the dark red tips to the yellow base. In higher grades, the yellow strand is removed, leaving only a long strand of pure red. That means a kilo of saffron could be made up of 450,000 strands. And to get that many strands, you need 150,000 flowers. And those flowers take up a lot of growing space. Cumin, for example, can yield 600 kilos per acre. Nutmeg gets you around 350 kilograms in the same space. Use that land for saffron instead, and you get a 1.8 kilogram harvest. Despite the incredible amount of work and space this crop takes up, demand for the spice is increasing, and over 200 metric tons of saffron threads are harvested worldwide each year. That's the result of about 30 billion flowers. Demand for the threads is so high that many adulterate or produce fake saffron. Threads that look real at first glance could actually be made of corn silks, coconut fibres, or even horsehair. Synthetic colourings are also used to dye the lower grade stigmas and sell them as high grade saffron. In late 2019, a fake saffron crime ring was uncovered in the UK, which led to a 2-year international investigation. And back in 2010, Spain exported 190,000 kilos of saffron, worth $50 million, but the country's total production amounted to only 1,500 kilos. At the time, a local farmers' union reported that up to 90% of Spanish saffron exports were fraudulent. The industry has attempted to crack down on these fake and mislabeled products, but the problem still persists, and the market for fake saffron is closing many real saffron farmers down. So what does real saffron actually taste like?
I've been asked that one by a lot of people over the years. It's so difficult to describe, which is, I think, part of its fascination for people and why it ended up, as an expensive product, because it just adds something. It's a bittersweet flavour, it's an earthy flavour. Trying to replicate it's very difficult. People have tried to do that, I know.
While saffron is just as popular as ever, it's been sought after throughout history. In Greek mythology, Zeus sometimes slept on a bed of saffron, and Cleopatra was said to bathe in saffron and milk, using the dyeing properties of the spice as an ancient fake tan. Every culture seems to have its own myth about the spice's powers, and in the 14th century, saffron's popularity skyrocketed across Europe when it was thought to be a possible cure for the plague. But there's a recent looming problem for saffron and its price: climate change. In Kashmir, production has dropped significantly, and many farmers are selling their land instead.
We had very few rains in the last, I think, 4 or 5 years. The temperature and the climate has completely changed in Kashmir. When I was a kid, when we used to go to the saffron farms to pick up the saffron, it would at least take us 2 days to pick up the saffron from the same fields, which nowadays you could just pick up in half an hour. I'm very emotional about the saffron, because this is a cultural identity of Kashmir and especially the people of Pampur. But the thing is that the production is declining, and the lands are being sold, the houses are being built on the saffron lands. It really disheartens me.
Between 2017 and 18, saffron production in the region fell almost 70%, from 16.5 metric tons down to 5.2. And with continuing droughts and climate change, this harvest could become even more rare.
This is where some of America's best restaurants get their steak. Pat LaFrida Meat Purveyors supplies thousands of restaurants from New York to Las Vegas. It has the largest dry aging room in the world. One family has run this business for over a century, and Pat is the third generation owner.
Right now there's well over $10 million of meat in here.
He brought in a whole new approach to the business, selling high-end meat to both fancy restaurants, but also to burger chains like Shake Shack. Pat's team produces 250,000 pounds of meat every night.
It's kind of like Jenga, where you're moving one piece and another piece comes in. It takes years to develop an army like we have.
Their weapons? Butcher's knives, bandsaws, and meat grinders. So how does Pat LaFrida manage to supply everything from $3 smash burgers to $200 steaks? And how did he turn a humble butcher shop into a $270 million meat empire? Pat only buys prime and choice beef, the highest USDA grades. These cuts have the most marbling, which adds flavor. So how does all this pricey steak get to kitchens?
Chefs normally know what they want to order or what they need to order after that dinner serving. And then they really want the product delivered the next morning, a few hours later.
That's why shifts here start around 6 p.m. And then it's a race against the clock. Some kitchens need these steaks by the following morning.
The only way to work through the night is to have cohesion. As a former military guy myself, building that team, it takes time.
Many steaks start in this dry aging room, which holds 15,000 of Pat's finest cuts. It has to stay at 36 degrees Fahrenheit and 80% humidity. Otherwise, everything will spoil or freeze, and Pat could lose millions. As the meat ages, moisture evaporates and muscles break down.
But we know that the dry aging process is working when we see that the protein has sunken in from the bone and the fat.
Workers wheel the meat to the portioning section. Master butchers go to work on everything from tomahawk steaks to New York strips, slicing them exactly the way each restaurant wants. Pat trained most of these butchers himself.
The ones you made this morning were beautiful. Oh, yeah. There really are no butcher schools. Our restaurants will ask me, Pat, where do you get your butchers from? I'm like, we don't get our butchers, we make our butchers.
They only need a few tools to get the job done.
In most people's hands, you're gonna see boning knives. With this, you could basically do the whole job until you get to cutting the steak across, and that's where you want a scimitar knife. And what makes this a butcher knife as opposed to a chef's knife? We have a protective corner.
But certain cuts require using a bandsaw. It's ideal for slicing through bone or doing high volume orders as fast as possible. And only master butchers can operate them.
It's probably a good 2.5 years before they would even get to a bandsaw.
Next, workers load everything onto trucks. If a customer is local, Pat's team can deliver within a few hours. The Press Club Grill in New York City gets thousands of pounds of meat from LaFrida per week. Owner and chef Franklin Becker showed us how he prepares a boneless ribeye.
Yeah, I try to season it fairly aggressively, okay, and let all that salt kind of penetrate into the pores of the meat. And then I'm going on to an infrared broiler. This steak doesn't take long. It's pretty quick.
In just 5 to 6 minutes, you'll get a juicy medium rare.
So you see that fat starting to caramelize, okay? If you let it rest, then the meat's gonna kind of reabsorb all those juices. And when you slice it, there's gonna be nothing left really on the board. That's when a steak is perfectly rested. That's when you know that you've cooked it right.
One of the most legendary steakhouses in New York City, Peter Luger, has been sourcing meat cuts from La Frida since 1998.
Peter Luger has garnered its reputation as a New York City institution, frankly, due to a lot of hard work. And I think it starts with our attention to detail in selecting each piece of meat that comes into this restaurant. We're really about letting the highest quality steak we can buy shine with just a little salt and a tiny bit of butter. We cook the steak to order and we send it out sizzling hot to the guests. That's it.
But La Frida doesn't just supply fancy restaurants. Back in 2004, Pat bought the company's first burger machine to make patties for a new fast casual chain that was about to open, Shake Shack. Pat created a special blend without trimmings or added fat for the new chain. Shake Shack still uses Pat's recipes today, and La Frida still supplies patties for more than 100 of its locations. Every burger starts on the main floor. 2,000 pounds of Angus beef are dumped onto conveyor belts. Machines spray them with diluted vinegar that kills potential germs. Other machines grind and mix the meat. The ground meat goes into patty forming machines which can make 200 different blends. Workers need to move fast. The company pumps out over 200,000 burgers a day.
It gets pretty hectic and frustrating sometimes when it gets overloaded, but every single day is just a different challenge.
Mel's Butcher Box in Tenafly, New Jersey, is one of Pat's loyal customers. Owner Melanie Landano orders up to 100 pounds of burgers from him a day.
For the restaurant, we use the original Pat La Frida blend, which is a short rib brisket blend. For special events, if a customer requests dry-aged brisket burgers, we get that. Some people request a 45-day dry-aged burger. Anything I want, Pat will make for us. Once we put it on the grill, we leave it on the grill. And a lot of people like to press on the meat, then all the juices come out. What I do, I flip it once, I leave it and let it cook, and then I let it rest here.
On top of her daily customers, Mel also cooks burgers for 4 local schools. On Monday morning alone, she grills over 200 patties for students.
So today we're probably going to cook 5 or 6 cases in 1 hour. So it's Burger Palooza.
Mel also buys La Frida's skirt steaks, ribeye cheesesteaks, and meatballs.
Here's our La Frida meatballs. This is going with this penne meatball. We're just heating up. This is his grandfather's recipe, and they're delicious. I'm Italian, so I don't use any other meatball but Pat La Frida meatball, if I have no time to make my own. So.
Family recipes are still an important part of La Frida's. Pat's great-grandfather opened a Brooklyn butcher shop in 1922. After moving the operation to Manhattan's growing meatpacking district, Pat's grandfather took over and started Pat La Frida Meat Purveyors. Pat started learning the job as a child.
My favorite times were cutting meat with my grandfather to my left and my dad to my right.
But Pat's father insisted his son try a different career first.
He didn't want me to work those hours. He didn't want me in that environment.
Pat spent 9 months working as a stockbroker, but then ditched that job to join the family business. A decade later, Pat would be named CEO.
And now my dad can't wait for my son to go off to college and come back and run the family business.
When Pat joined in 1994, the company had 44 restaurant customers. Now, they have 1,600 and are posting annual sales of $270 million.
We are several hundred times larger than we were.
In 2021, Pat opened this new $20 million facility. To keep such a massive operation running, Pat has to be more than a manager, though.
He does everything. He comes, works in production, he works with us, he goes on the table, He goes to see customers, he oversees everything.
It's something I love to do, and I do a lot of my best thinking while I'm cutting meat. To me, it's a relaxing time.
Even after this much growth, Pat thinks there's room for more.
This facility produces about 250,000 pounds of product a night, and with the capacity to probably triple or quadruple that. So we built it with the space to be able to expand from there.
After these leaves are plucked, dried, and ground, they will turn into the finest matcha. But not all matcha is the same. The greener matcha is, the smoother and more complex its flavour. High-quality jade green matcha can cost 20 times as much as pale green matcha. And while this bright green powder takes a few seconds to dissolve in water, it takes an entire year to grow the plant it comes from. So what makes ceremonial grade matcha so exceptional? And why is it so expensive? Matcha at its highest quality is referred to as ceremonial grade because of the central role it plays in Japanese tea ceremonies. Lower quality matcha, also called culinary grade matcha, can be made sweet with sugar and cream in desserts, but in its tea form, it's very bitter.
お抹茶っていうフレーバーというか、フレーバーとして広がっている部分がすごくあると思うんですけど、実際飲んだことない方の方が大半かなとは。
Jintaro is a 6th generation matcha producer. He runs a 180-year-old tea farm, one of the oldest in Uji, Japan, a city with a centuries-old tea history.
本当にこの2週間で1年間のお茶の味が決まるので、この2週間に全てをかけてやっていますね。
In spring, they sprout young, tender leaves, and that's the sign that matcha season has begun.
新芽の匂いですね。この匂いを嗅ぐと本当にこの季節が来たなと思います。本当に楽しみでもありますし、本当にチャレンジ挑戦でもありますし、まあ本当になんていうかいろんな気持ちが渦巻く2週間ですね。体力的にはすごくしんどいですけど、精神的にはすごく楽しくできているかなと思ってますね。
To make matcha, he only needs the very first leaves of the plant. It's there that there's a higher concentration of nutrients, and they will make the best quality tea.
その旨味が強くて苦味が少ないものを目指して作りたいなと思っていたりするので、それをやっぱり実現するのは、本当にもう触れば折れるほど柔らかいので、力は積むのにはいらない。古い葉っぱは逆に引っ張っても取れなかったりする。
At peak harvest, collecting leaves can take hours, but the reason why the plants are in the shade is not to protect those plucking them from the sun, but to protect the plants themselves. Extensive exposure to sunlight develops bitterness in the leaves. Blocking the sunlight preserves their flavour and gives them a bright green colour. Before harvest in the spring, the plants spend 30 to 40 days in the shade. Jintaro uses rice straw panels to shade his plants, a method that's become extremely rare among tea farmers. Most farmers now use plastic nets. They're more convenient and can be reused.
ジメチルスルフィドっていう海苔っぽい香りっていうのが、いわゆる覆い香と言われるその覆いをしたお茶から香る香りがあるんですけども、
Jintaro's plants spend double the time in the shade of what is recommended to make matcha, which is 20 days. While plants that make lower grades of matcha are harvested 2 or 3 times a year, ceremonial grade matcha is made from plants that have been plucked only once. After an entire day of picking, Jintaro's work is just getting started.
摘み終わってからも茶の芽はずっと息をし続けているような状態なので、できるだけフレッシュな状態で、蒸して乾燥させるために、そうですね、早い、その日中には絶対やりたいなというところです。昨日作業終わったのは、そうですね、 本当に11時半から12時ぐらいでキロに着いたのは、1時前でしたね。どういう蒸しをしたらいいのか、どういう乾燥したらいいのか、やっぱり最初の方の日にちのもの、例えばもう今日なんていうのは本当にちょっと一番気を使うところではあります。
The first step of processing of the leaves is steaming. Steaming locks in the flavour and preserves their bright green colour. But most of all, it prevents oxidation, which would turn them into black tea.
発酵酵素を止めてしまうということ、その緑を維持するという作業になるかなと。ただその蒸しの通し具合で
After steaming, the leaves go into this leaf spreader, a series of 4 mesh tubes where they're rapidly cooled by the wind. This eliminates the water on the leaves and prepares them for the next step, drying. The tea leaves at Jintaro's farm are dried using a 97-year-old furnace, which gives them a unique roasted aroma.
この風合いを守りながら、なるべく自分の理想とするところのいいものができるようにしたいなと思って。
After drying, the stems are removed and the leaves are sorted. Leaves up until this point are called tencha, and they will only become matcha after they're turned into a green powder. But before doing that, Jintaro usually tastes the unrefined leaves. He's very critical of his work.
いい感じ。蒸しは通ってますね。毎回します。やっぱりどういうものができたかっていうのが湯に浸すとすごく香りとかも分かりやすいので、結局乾物の状態でもある程度の香りは分かるんですけど、湯に浸した方がすごく分かりやすい。でお抹茶になった時にどういう風になるかなっていう想像ができやすいですね。まあ具体的に言うと、色はうちのものにしてはすごくいいなと思ってます。あとは味も、苦味は全然なくてそれはすごくいいんですけど、うまみもなくはない。ただやっぱりなんというか、いつもそうなんですけど、結局理想はすごく高くて毎年まあまあって言ってると思います。よく諸先輩方にも共通して同じ気持ちだなって思うのは、本当に一生のうちに満足できるお茶ができるのなんて1回か2回ぐらいと。
Ceremonial grade matcha is ground using a stone mill. It's designed to grind counterclockwise only. This traditional method grinds a fine powder that preserves the nutrients of the leaf, but it's very slow. It takes Jintaro an entire hour to grind just 40 grams of matcha. With an automated crusher, this would happen in seconds. The matcha stone mills are some of the most traditional instruments in Japan. They're made of granite and are entirely hand-carved. Just one of these stone mills can cost over $1,300. It grinds the matcha into a fine, glossy powder. But once matcha is ground, the fragrance slowly disappears and becomes more delicate. So Jintaro usually grinds it one more time before selling it.
いただきます。やはり苦味渋みの少なさとうまみ、朝日独特の香りと、あとは東園ならではの最古、日本最古の天茶乾燥炉ならではの少し火を感じるというか、香ばしいような香りが入っているのが特徴的かなと思いますね。
Ceremonial grade matcha contains a higher level of an antioxidant called catechin and more chlorophyll than other green teas. This is as a result of the shading process and the slow grinding. While the Japanese public has long been familiar with the distinction between ceremonial grade and culinary grade matcha, it's relatively new to the rest of the world. But matcha's popularity has been soaring. In 2020, the global matcha market was worth $3 billion, and it's expected to exceed $5.5 billion by 2027. In the last 10 years, exports of matcha from Japan have doubled. Compared to 30 years ago, they've quadrupled. But these numbers barely refer to ceremonial grade matcha. The lower costs of production, faster turnaround, and the ability to harvest leaves up to 3 times a year have made culinary grade matcha a more popular choice for farmers. In Uji, only 60 families are left growing ceremonial grade matcha. For Jintaro, taking over the family business wasn't an obvious choice.
お茶についてあんまり深く考えたことがなかったので、もうやりたくないんだよねとか言ってると、なんかそんな素晴らしいことって本当に世界的にも希少だよっていうこと。もう今では本当に仕事というよりも本当に半分なんというか趣味ではないですけど、非常に好きでやっているっていうところがあるかなと思います。
Once all this year's young leaves are picked and ground into matcha powder, Jintaro will spend the fall pruning the trees, ploughing and fertilizing the soil. Come winter, he will weave the rice straw to shade his plants, and new leaves will sprout again, ready to be turned into matcha.
今18年お茶に携わってますけど、理想のお茶っていうのは本当にできてないと思っていますし、ただ多分ずっとそうなのかなとも思っているんですけど、難しいんですけど、まあ僕は本当にお茶が好きでやっているので。
Now, let's head to Greece, where some of the finest olive oil in the world is produced.
This olive oil is considered a very bitter, very spicy olive oil, very intense, grassy, fruity, and that is what makes Koroneiki very special. Like the aromas of that and the spiciness, the intense character it has.
This region has a mild Mediterranean climate with extended periods of sunshine, which makes it the ideal home for olive groves. Koroneiki olives are harvested from late October until late January. The best olive oil is considered to be the one extracted from the olives harvested in the first 3 weeks, when they're bright green. Early harvest olive oil is more nutritious. It is rich in polyphenols and antioxidants, which make the flavor fresher and more intense. As the olives ripen, they do not really get any bigger, but they will get darker. These ripe olives contain more oil than the green ones and will give a larger yield, but their oil has a milder flavor. To preserve the nutrients inside the Koroneiki olive, the harvest happens as fast as possible. There are 2 methods. One is to shake the olives out of the tree with these electric sticks.
Now they just brush the olives fall and they do not hurt the tree.
And it's only the olives that are ready to fall that actually come down.
They do everything. So basically they go through the tree. Some of them are more ripe, some of them are more green. We need them both. We need them both to be harvested, all of them.
This one, yeah. Whoa, and so okay. Need to do this job with goggles or something. It's, let's see.
Another method is to prune all the inside branches and then collect the olives with the help of this machine, which filters out the leaves.
So the olives feel inside.
There's olives falling.
Be careful, be careful.
It's raining olives.
Yeah, it's raining olives. Bravo, like this.
Yeah.
With both methods, the olives fall into a net, which is made of breathable material to avoid compressing the olives. The net is then closed and the more stubborn branches and leaves are taken out by hand.
Like fast. It's like brushing them. Yes.
So how many olives do you put in one sack?
50 kilos of olives in one sack.
Wow.
And from that you get 10 kilos of olive oil. Okay, scratch the olive, squeeze it to find the olive oil inside. Now look, this is the olive oil.
Oh, look. It's actually whiter, of course, because it's mixed with some pulp, yeah.
And smell it. Fresh.
Nice.
This is the fresh grass that we're looking for in a fresh olive oil. Exactly that sensation, that you just have crushed the olive and find the aroma.
Oh yeah, there's so much juice inside the olive itself. Can we taste it?
No, they're very bitter.
They are.
They are very bitter.
But it's still nice.
The Koroneiki olive has a sister, Kalamata. Both varieties are important for the life of the olive grove.
This is really good for the pollination of the trees. Also think of tradition. People produced what they needed for the house. So they needed both Kalamata olives and olive oil.
Because of their bitterness, Kalamata olives are not turned into olive oil. They are instead used as table olives and go through a debittering process. They are cured in brine, then vinegar, and then stored in jars with Koroneiki olive oil.
have more than 2,000 olive trees. Some of them are 1,000 years old. We are very connected with the olive trees. Every family has 200 trees, 300 trees. It is their olive oil for the family, even though they are not farmers, and it's also for them an extra income.
Together with extracting the oil from her family's groves, Dimitra will usually work with local families to extract their own oil. Her meal is actually paid in olive oil by these families, as it keeps 8% of the production. More than 1,000 sacks arrive every day during peak harvest at Dimitra's mill. The oil is extracted within 24 hours. After this machine blows the leaves out, the olives are washed. This is an important step to remove any soil that may be in the olives that will give the oil an earthy taste. There is also a scale here to weigh the olives and see what percentage of olive oil is extracted from them.
We need to weigh the olives to see how many olives every family has brought. Usually for the Koroneiki variety, when it's early harvest, it's about 14%. When it's mid-season, it's about 20%.
The olives, including the pits, are ground into a paste. The paste ferments and spins for a few minutes to bring out the aromas of the Koroneiki olive. Then the temperature cools down really fast to be able to extract the oil.
Cold extraction means that the olive oil is produced with olives less than 28 degrees Celsius.
Yeah.
Okay?
Because otherwise you would cook basically the...
Exactly, you burn the olive oil. Yeah, yeah. Now we extract the olive oil, so basically we don't press the olives. Press is open air, so now here we don't want any oxygen. Press is human touch, we don't want that.
The extraction of the olive oil happens in this machine here in just 15 minutes. It works like a big centrifuge to separate the solids, like the paste, the pit and the flesh, from the liquid, which is our olive oil. The process is very fast. From their arrival, olives are turned into oil in less than 45 minutes. The liquid gold that comes out is extra virgin olive oil, the finest grade in the family of olive oils. Extra virgin means that the cold extraction has preserved all the antioxidants and polyphenols present in the Koroneiki olive, like cheese made with raw milk. Olive oil is also measured by a parameter called free acidity. For extra virgin, the free acidity must be 0.8% or less, meaning that less than 0.8% of the fatty acids normally present in olive oil have been damaged, either in production or storage. Extra virgin olive oil is more nutritious but also has a shorter shelf life compared to other grades.
We have the liquids and now we have to separate the liquids. There is some water that's naturally inside the olive oil. Again, it's a second centrifugation. At this time it's vertical. Olive oil is light, goes on the surface. Water is heavy, goes down, and like this naturally they are separated.
Olive oil is stored in 300-ton stainless steel tanks. When not full, the tanks are filled with nitrogen. In fact, light, oxygen and temperature are the worst enemies of olive oil. Unlike wine, there is no such thing as aging in the bottle. Olive oil is only bottled when needed. Dimitra's mill produces more than 600 tanks of olive oil every year.
This is my office.
Olive mill, yeah.
The traditional olive oil mill. So it was in 1904 that the olive oil mill started working. And my husband now is the fifth generation owner of the olive oil mill.
Oh wow, so this is how it was originally.
This is the family, so this is my father-in-law. In that photo he's four.
The small,
yeah, the small boy is 4 years old, now he's 74. Okay, you're very lucky because this is the early harvest olive oil, harvested 10 days ago. So this is as fresh as you can get it, okay? This is the Koroneiki variety. This is from our own land, family estate. I want you to take your hand like this. Close it and cup it. And let's roll it a bit. Usually when we taste the olive oils, we taste them in 28 degrees. This is the perfect temperature because you have the aromas of the olive oil, you feel them, okay? Extra virgin olive oil has 3 characteristics. Number 1 is fruitiness. Fruitiness, you can only sense it with your nose. And fruitiness has a scale from 0 to 10 by international standards. Let's put our nose in.
Oh. I could put this on the bedside table.
Fruity, fresh. Nice. The Koroneiki variety has the fresh cut grass as a characteristic.
Yeah,
okay.
It smells exactly like that.
This is a fruitiness around 6.5.
And then, what are the other 2 characteristics?
Bitter, you feel it here, right and left part of your tongue. And spicy, you feel it here when you swallow your olive oil.
spicy.
So it's that movement you do the
oxygen.
To sort of make the
Breathe.
olive oil.
Yes,
Breathe.
yes.
So this is when you want oxygen. This is
Exactly.
the only time where you need a little bit of it.
You want a fresh and clean mouth, not to be disturbing, you're not feeling bad. Good quality bread, good quality olive oil can really make me blessed, make me feel really good.
So nice. Well, you are definitely blessed to be doing this.
I love it, I love it.
This cinnamon was once as valuable as gold. It's known as Ceylon cinnamon, or true cinnamon, and it's healthier and sweeter than other kinds. Sri Lanka produces 90% of the world's supply. But true cinnamon is up against a powerful rival. A lower quality kind called cassia. It can be unhealthy in large amounts, but it's up to 10 times cheaper. So, it dominates the global market. The problem is cassia and Ceylon look nearly identical in powder form, and loose labeling laws make it easy for brands to mix in cheap cassia with the more expensive stuff, or replace it completely. So why is this Sri Lankan spice considered to be the best cinnamon in the world? And how do you know it's actually what's in your spice rack? Suneth harvests cinnamon for Rathna, one of Sri Lanka's largest producers. He starts working in the fields before sunrise, so he can harvest the spice while there's moisture in the air. Ceylon comes from the inner bark of cinnamon tree branches. They have to be cut at an inward angle. If Suneth cuts carefully, he can harvest each tree for half a century. After about 4 hours of cutting, he hauls the last batch of branches back to the estate's main building. Each bundle of branches is soaked in a water tank for at least 15 minutes. This will make the bark easier to peel off. Suneth's work has just begun. Until at least 10 p.m., he works with a team of peelers like Saman to scrape each branch one by one. It exposes a softer inner bark. This is the actual cinnamon. Brass rods smooth the surface and loosen the cinnamon from the hard wood. Then, with surgical precision, they carve and slice the bark into thin strips known as quills. The quills are so thin that they immediately curl up as they dry. Small pieces of inner bark, called quillings, prevent rips. Saman gets paid by the weight. The quills typically need to dry for a week. Then, they're sent off to the factory to be processed. 15 minutes down the road, sorters determine the value of each quill. The thinner the quill, the more expensive it is. Just like meat, cinnamon gets a grade. Rathna uses 8 in total, all based on diameter. The highest quality, known as alba, is as thin as a pencil. It's twice as valuable as H2 FAQ, the lowest grade. Only one in about 25 quills gets the alba grade. Sorters like Violet grade thousands of quills a day, and she can grade each one in a few seconds. Once the quills are sorted, they cut them into different lengths and package them up for shipping. The long cuts are packaged in bulk to be sold wholesale. Shorter 3-inch sticks go to grocery stores. But for much of human history, a sack of this cinnamon would have been worth a fortune. The spice was traded across the ancient world since at least 2000 BC. Merchants peddled legends that the sweet-smelling bark came from the nest of a mythical bird. At one point, cinnamon was more valuable than gold. By the 13th century, Sri Lanka had begun exporting the spice directly to Egypt, and Arab traders brought it to medieval Europe. Ceylon cinnamon was so sought after, it became a status symbol for the rich. Soon, European countries wanted to profit off the trade themselves. For more than 300 years, the Portuguese, Dutch, and British fought over the island and control of its valuable exports. The country declared independence and regained control of its cinnamon lands in 1948. But by then, a cheaper alternative, cassia, had already begun to dominate the market. Cassia comes from a totally different tree, which grows taller and has thicker bark. Most of it is produced on farms in East or Southeast Asia, like this one in Indonesia. The country has roughly twice the amount of cinnamon plantations as Sri Lanka. Producers can harvest entire trees at one time. The process requires fewer workers and makes it easier to produce in bulk. Cassia farmers can harvest 10 times the amount of cinnamon per acre than Ceylon farmers. But cassia could pack hidden health risks. Ceylon cinnamon boosts the immune system, lowers blood pressure, and stabilizes blood sugar. Cassia has health benefits too, but it contains high levels of a compound called coumarin, which can cause liver damage if consumed in high doses. Cassia can have 250 times more of it than Ceylon, but you'd have to eat roughly a teaspoon of cassia a day for weeks to put yourself at risk. Countries like Germany have rules to limit coumarin in foods. The US doesn't regulate the amount of coumarin in cinnamon. So, how do you spot the difference in the spice aisle? It's easier when you're buying cinnamon sticks. Ceylon quills have more of a brown hue. If they look red, there's a good chance you're eating cassia. Cassia sticks are also thicker. They're usually half an inch and hard to break. Meanwhile, Ceylon can be as fragile as cigar paper. Taste can be another giveaway. Cassia usually has a strong and spicy flavor. Ceylon is sweeter and milder. But powdered cinnamon is harder to verify. Some fraudsters have been caught mixing powdered cassia with Ceylon, but marketing it as pure Ceylon. One study found that over half of the products in European and US grocery stores contained mixed cinnamon.
Once it mixed with Ceylon cinnamon and cassia, it's hard to detect what is there. Only the coumarin content helped the people to know this one, but the consumers, they are far away from that kind of test.
But she says no one in the US or the EU is stopping this. In the US, it's estimated that the FDA only physically inspects 1 to 2% of imported foods, like spices.
The regulatory authorities, they are kind of deep in a silence in this adulteration. Even their health consequences, they are not taking any action.
So how is Sri Lanka supposed to compete in an industry filled with fraud? In 2022, it scored a major win. The European Union granted a coveted geographical indication tag to Ceylon cinnamon. That means any spice bottle labeled Ceylon in the EU has to come from Sri Lanka. It's like how real champagne can only come from one region of France. The tag could reduce competition, increase Ceylon's value, and boost sales. But it only goes so far. In both the EU and US, brands don't have to add the tag or indicate what type of cinnamon they're selling. So, it's hard for customers to know what they're eating. De Silva says adding the botanical or species name of Ceylon on the ingredients list will help inform customers.
So the consumer knows that cinnamon comes from which area of the Sri Lanka even, and then who did the processing, which conditions they use.
She hopes this will help Sri Lanka's thousands of producers earn more for their salon.
It's a culture. How many people depend on this industry?
This 70-year-old company hauls in £140,000 of forest-grown shiitake a year. It starts here, in the forests of the Japanese prefecture of Miyazaki. Farmers use a 1,000-year-old technique to grow the rarest of them all, white flower. Sugimoto Shiitake sells these premium caps for at least $400 per kilo. But the company says less than 1% of the mushrooms it processes are given that top-tier designation. Forest-grown shiitakes are getting harder to cultivate, and the conditions needed to produce the white flower variety are so specific that even a few drops of rain can ruin them. On top of that, the appetite for all kinds of shiitakes is decreasing in Japan, where they've historically been a staple. That's why Sugimoto and other Japanese companies are increasingly turning to a global market to future-proof their business. So what makes these forest-grown mushrooms so expensive? And can this rare Japanese shiitake make a comeback?
まず、木にドリルで穴を開けます。そしてそこにこの椎茸の菌が、入ったプラグ、これを穴に入れて、約2年。
This process is known as inoculation. And at this stage, there's no telling which sprouts will become white flower shiitake.
そして2年経ったら椎茸が毎年春と秋、生えてくるようになります。
That's how long it takes for the fungus to spread throughout the log and start sprouting harvestable caps. Each log produces mushrooms for about 6 years.
すべての栄養を吸ってしまいました。なので、あとはもうこういうふうにボロボロと、土に帰っていくだけです。
原料を他から探してくるんじゃなくて、やっぱ自分の近くの家の近くからずっとローテーションしながらずっとこの栽培を続けていっている。
This species of tree is not only plentiful, but apparently delicious.
で特にそのクヌギの木っていうのは甘い、樹液を持っているので、非常にそのなんて言うんでしょう、味わいが良くて、しかも歯ごたえのある椎茸が作れる木です。
Forest-grown mushrooms are at the top of the shiitake hierarchy. They are more difficult and unpredictable to produce than indoor-grown, which leads to their heftier price tag. Even in the US, the price of forest-grown shiitakes can reach $40 per kilo, while the price of indoor-grown greenhouse shiitakes is only half of that.
小というおかくずで作るやつはやはり味もなければ香りもない。そういった形から言えば原木椎茸というのは出汁も取れますし、香りもいいし、食感もいいし、食べて美味しいというのが。
Then there are the two main types of shiitake based on their shape.
一つはドンコ。ドンコは実が厚くて、縁がしっかり巻いていて、6割で、それから香芯。香芯は非常に薄くて。
The top-tier version of donko is called hanadonko, or white flower. That's the one that fetches that $400 per kilo price tag.
普通の椎茸が柔らかいと、柔らかいとすれば天白はコリコリした食感になりますので、全然食べる感覚が変わってきます。
The difference between a regular donko and a white flower shiitake comes down to the cap. All donko mushrooms will have distinct cracks, but the pattern on a white flower is more dispersed, like this. But to grow any shiitake this way, conditions have to be perfect.
シーズンが来ても雨が少なかったら芽が出ないとか、寒かったら大きくならないとか、雨が降ると大きくなりすぎるとか、いろんなところを気を使いながら
And white flour caps can't be directly rained on at all. When water gets into those cracks on the surface, it discolors the mushrooms and decreases their value.
だけどこの木の影になっているところ、雨が当たらないところに、いいものが生えていることが多いです。
When they're ready, workers like Naokokai harvest each one by hand. Traditionally, logs are left unprotected in the forest. But growers like Guy Husao started growing mushrooms in an outdoor structure he calls an artificial log yard to gain some control over his environment.
瓶を張って雨が降らないようにするし、雨が少ないとこのスプリンクラーで水を必要な水分を与えて、強制的に椎茸を発生させる、そういう施設です。
Even with this limited control, the recent unpredictable climate is affecting how much he can harvest. In 2010, Guy Husao left his life in Osaka to join his father on this Shiitake mushroom farm.
私の父親が10万から15万の間でずっとやってたんですが、私が帰ってきた時人数も多いし、ということで倍にしましてね、30万個ぐらいを。
But a combination of his parents' aging and an increasingly unpredictable climate caused the farm's productivity to shrink again.
で今現在は10万から15万の間でまた父がやってた頃の量で今やってる時代ですね。だから稼ぐのはやっぱりなかなかこの気候の変動が大きくて昔みたいにやっぱりできないっていうのが最近の状態です。本当に季節が読めない状態になってきてますので地球温暖化がもういいし。
A smaller yield means fewer white flower shiitakes, which only make up about 8% of Husao's harvest.
キノコはどれでもじゃあ天白になるのかっていうとなかなか難しい。
White flower, regular donko, and Urchin mushrooms are harvested all at once, loaded up in crates or bags, and taken to Sugimoto's processing facility to be sorted, dried, and packaged.
で機械でサイズを分けた後も下の階にある遠赤外線乾燥炉というところで椎茸の水分をコントロール。
Drying shiitakes this way actually amplifies their umami flavor. Dehydration breaks down the cell walls of the mushroom, releasing and concentrating the compounds responsible for their taste. All that flavor remains even after they're rehydrated.
なのでもちろんフレッシュで食べても美味しいんですけど、フレッシュな花どんことその乾燥した花どんこっていうのはおそらく食べ比べるとこんなにも違うのかと驚くと思う。
After the drying process, workers like Eddie Hoshi will hand sort the shiitakes by color, shape, and size. This is where she'll be able to separate the white flour from the rest of the donko.
はい。普通のどんこと違って普通のどんこはこちらなんですけど、こちらは模様があるんですけど、花どんこは天白どんこは、このようにこの白の割合が多いものを選んでおさの色と縁の巻きとあと大きさで選んでます。どんこでも、模様があって天白でも中のおさの色が悪かったりこういうふうに縁がしっかり巻いているものじゃないと、どんこにはならないので、それだけ貴重な、花どんこ、天白どんこになります。
White flower mushrooms must be flawless. And Sugimoto is picky about the other types of shiitake the company processes too. Sorters will filter out any mushrooms that have aesthetic flaws.
ここでこういうふうにちょっと色が悪いもの、それから割れてしまっているもの、そういったものをここで取り除いていきます。
These mushrooms will be used in other products like the company's shiitake powder. It's used by chefs all over the world as a natural umami booster.
広まってますよね、実際ね。椎茸の戻し方、食べ方を知らないというのがもう根本的になって、若い人がちょっと椎茸離れ。
Even though demand is slowing in Japan, the global appetite for mushrooms is steadily growing. And shiitakes in particular are sought after for their perceived health benefits. So, Sugimoto has been increasingly tapping into international markets.
ですので今後この需要が伸びるかというとそこはちょっと非常に難しいんですけど、ただ日本ではそうですけど、香港それから台湾ですとその花どんこっていうのはものすごく昔今も
ね、そこでやっぱ海外の方にこういうパイプをつないでいただいて、安定価格も安定してきたということで非常に助かっている状態ですね。今とそのやる気が起きているという状態ですかね、今のところ。
According to the Mushroom Council, over the past decade in the US, there's been a more than 100% increase in specialty mushroom sales, primarily driven by shiitake.
They're so versatile, they're just so amazing, and you can do so much with them.
Ravi De Rossi is the co-owner of Third Kingdom, a mushroom-centric restaurant in New York City. Most of its mushrooms are sourced locally, but white flour calls for special circumstances.
We get it flown in from Japan, and when they have them, they'll ship us a few. We'll run it as a special. We'll invite just like some of our special regular customers and let them know what we're doing.
Regular donko also shows up on the menu from time to time. Executive chef Juan Pajarito dreams up the dishes like this one, prepared steak and onion style.
Diría que un tipo de artista, jugar con los hongos.
While donko shiitakes are in season, he'll reach for them over thin Cochin ones when he wants an amplified experience.
Un shiitake normal, sí. Vemos la diferencia de carnosidad que tiene ese hongo. White flower shiitake mushroom es un poco, como digo, más carnoso. El sabor es más intenso, más fuerte al shiitake regular. Esa es la diferencia, pero le digo, el umami que tiene es algo muy diferente al regular shiitake.
So leaning into the international market is key for companies like Sugimoto.
出たっていうのはがスタートですけど、今僕らが海外にその原木栽培の椎茸を紹介してすごく強く感じているのは絶対に真似されないというすごい強みを持っている。
Pulling these mossy green threads by hand is the only way to harvest kamte. And after hours of washing, shaping, and drying, they will be transformed into one of South Korea's rarest seaweeds. When Chu Hyun-sung started her business, Padaso, kamte was mainly harvested and eaten raw by locals in the Sosan region. But turning this small industry into a thriving business presented a challenge.
그때는 감태가 뭔지도 모르니까 고객분들이 감태를 구매를 할 생각을 아예 못 하셨던 거거든요.
So she worked to get this earthy and sweet seaweed to people outside the region. Not just to anyone, but to the culinary world's biggest players. All while navigating unpredictable harvests and rising prices.
제가 처음에 감태 시작했을 때는 뭐 감태가 예를 들어서 원물 자체가 1kg에 이건 예로 1kg에 10만 원이다. 즉 하면은 지금은 거의 1kg에 한 30만 원 정도 되거든요.
So how did Chu Hyun take kamte from local delicacy to worldwide sensation? And why is it so expensive?
10년 전만 해도 감태하면 뭐야 도대체 사람들이 감퇴? 막 이렇게까지 심지어 얘기해가지고 제가 되게 좀 속상했었는데 이제는 이제 젊은 친구들도 감태하면은 아 뭔가 고급 레스토랑에서 쓰이는 좀 비싼 거 이런 인지가 생기고.
But before reaching restaurant kitchens, kamte's journey starts on the freezing cold western shoreline of South Korea's Garorim Bay. Unlike other types of edible seaweed like nori that can be farmed, kamte can only grow in the wild on mudflats, coastal wetlands that form when ocean tides wash in sediment and mud.
그러니까 감태 같은 경우는 해조류인데도 불구하고 다른 해조류들은 이제 바닷물에 둥둥 떠서 있는데 지금 보시면 감태는 여기 이렇게 뿌리를 내리고 있는 게 잘 보이거든요. 그러니까 사실 해조류임에도 뭐 야채와 채소 같은 성격을 가지고 있는 굉장히 좀 독특한 해조류라고 보시면 됩니다.
Because of this, gamtae can only be harvested by hand. Any other way could destroy the root of the plant, impacting the supply for next year.
채취를 할 때 뿌리는 내버려 두고 중간에 끊어서 좀 채취를 해야 나중에 걔네들이 또 자라고 하는 과정들이 있거든요.
Since gamtae can go bad if exposed to high temperatures for too long, harvesting happens from December to March, when the sea is the coldest. For these 4 months, Joo-hyun and her team must collect as much gamtae as possible to meet demand from buyers for the rest of the year. They can spend 6 hours a day pulling gamtae from the mudflats.
그러니까 추운 거랑 물에 잘 빠지는 거, 그 다음에 이렇게 쭈그려 앉다 보니까 정말 늘 이렇게 허리가 되게 아프더라고요. 작업하다 보니까. 손만 시려운 게 아니라 발도 시렸고, 그리고 지금은 안 그런데 정말 갯벌에 칼바람이 장난 아니거든요.
The intense harvesting process is only the first difference between gamtae and more common nori seaweed. Compared to nori's dark green colour and slightly coarse feel, gamtae's bright green, fine strands have a more delicate texture. This laborious process is just one of the reasons gamtae costs so much more than other seaweeds, and relying on the rhythms of nature means supply can be unpredictable.
이게 자연산이다 보니까 이게 안 놔도 제가 할 수 있는 일은 없고 사실은 그렇거든요.
Recently, warming sea temperatures have disrupted the growth.
올해 같은 경우가 굉장히 어려웠는데 지금 좀 등섬 감태가 있잖아요. 그래서 올해는 수확량이 예전에 거의 3분의 1밖에 안 되는 것 같아요.
To make up the difference, Joo-hyun buys gamtae from local fishermen who collect it.
지금 저희가 뭐 감태 작업하시는 가구는 한 50가구 이상 같이 하고 있어요. 제가 나올 때 좀 매집을 많이 해두는 편입니다.
Gamtae also has a richer, more pungent flavor than nori.
감태가 굉장히 매력적인 게 되게 달달하면서도 좀 쌉스름한 향이 있거든요. 그래서 달달하면서 좀 쌉스름한 게 다른 해조류랑은 되게 좀 다른 특성이 있는 것 같아요.
But that flavor comes with a price tag. An 8-sheet pack of gamtae costs $16. 50 sheets of nori can be bought for the same price. But whether it's harvested by workers or locals, all the gamtae has to be washed back at the factory. It's the most crucial part of processing because any mud, debris, or critters left on the seaweed could affect how it tastes in the end.
그리고 얘는 이제 갑각류의 새끼 같은 거예요. 사실 이게 자연산이다 보니까 이런 것들이 조금씩 있을 수가 있는데 이제 특히나 저희가 공급하고 있는 데가 뭐 파인다이닝이나 뭐 호텔이나 뭐 이런 뭐 백화점이나 이런 쪽이 되게 많은데 컴플레인이 걸리면 절대 안 되거든요.
Years ago, workers would have done this completely by hand, but this washing machine can clean 100 kilograms in less than 10 minutes. It's just one of the changes Joo-hyun made to the gamtae processing techniques she learned from her father.
그러니까 제가 이제 회사 생활을 접고 서산으로 내려와서 아버지한테 아빠 제가 감태를 만들어서 팔겠습니다라고 했을 때 아버지가 처음에 코웃음 치셨거든요.
Like many locals, Joo-hyun's father, Chol Soo-sung, grew up eating gamtae. But one day, he was struck with a new idea for processing it.
내가 이제 구워서 먹어보고 떠서 이제 보고 하니까 그때는 부가스도 있고 좋더라고. 그래서 그때부터 이제 감태를 시작을 한 거야. 이제 김같이 떠서.
Joo-hyun and her team of 15 still use his techniques to process gamtae at 바다숲.
그래서 아직도 저는 좀 어려워하고 지금도 아버지한테 틈틈이 배우고 있습니다.
Workers use a technique called harrowing to form the gamtae into paper-thin sheets. They submerge a handful of the seaweed in fresh water and mold it on top of a bamboo mat. While it may look simple, this technique can take 3 years to master.
사실 저도 몇 번 연습을 했는데 잘 안 되긴 하더라고요. 쉽지 않습니다. 이 작업이. 또 너무 두껍거나 너무 얇지도 않게 적당한 양을 잘 피는 게 되게 어렵더라고요. 우선은 여기 이제 빈 공간이 없는 거가 되게 중요하고 또 너무 이렇게 뭉쳐 있지 않는 게 되게 중요하거든요.
Joo-hyun uses this press to remove excess water from the gamtae.
물이 좀 잘 빠져야 이제 건조가 좋아지니까 또 건조를 오래 하게 되면은 상품의 이제 색감이나 이렇게 질이 조금 떨어질 수 있어서
The sheets dry the rest of the way in these dryers. Badar Soup sells gamtae sheets either raw or roasted at 230 degrees Celsius for 10 seconds.
구운 감태 같은 경우는 저희가 함초, 자염이랑 참기름, 옥배요 요 세 가지를 부어 같이 믹스해가지고 양념을 합니다.
Badar Soup produces 3,500 sheets of gamtae in a single day and exports roughly 500,000 each year. But carving out a market for gamtae outside of Sosan was anything but easy.
저는 저희가 공장을 만들고 감태를 맛있게 만들면 사람들이 알아서 찾아서 사줄 거라고 생각을 했거든요. 근데 제가 창업을 하고 2014년도에는 저희가 매출이 진짜 빵원이었어요.
Joo-hyun knew the only way to create a market for the seaweed was to teach people about it.
그래서 제가 그때부터 했던 게 감태가 뭔지 이걸 좀 알려야 되겠다라는 생각을 해서 감태가 무엇인가, 또 감태는 어떻게 먹으면 좋은가, 감태가 왜 귀한 음식인가, 좀 이런 것들을 알리는 데 많은 초점을 뒀습니다.
She focused on promoting it to the high-end market, sending samples of gamtae to Michelin-Starred chefs and writing articles describing its unique taste and texture. Eventually, her years of tireless promotion paid off. Joo-hyun says she began getting inquiries from chefs around the world.
그러다 보니까 한국에 대한 관심도 높아진 데다가 제가 만나본 셰프님들은 식재료에 대한 열망이 굉장히 크시더라고요. 특히나 처음 보는 식재료, 다른 사람들이 안 쓰는 식재료에 대한 열망이 굉장히 크셔가지고 감태를 소개해드렸을 때 셰프님들의 반응이 정말 눈이 반짝반짝 하시면서 이런 것도 있었냐라고 굉장히 좋아하시더라고요.
One of them is Chris Cipollone. He's the chef owner of the restaurant Francie in Brooklyn, New York. It's one of several Michelin-starred restaurants that sources gamtae through Badar Soup.
It's got this robust aroma. It's like an oceanic white truffle, is what I always describe it to people.
Chris has been using gamtae in his dishes for the last 10 years. It's a key ingredient in one of the restaurant's signature dishes, conchiglie.
Here we are in the kitchen. We're about to start making our actual pasta, the conchiglie itself, using the seaweed, and we have 4 simple ingredients. We have our semolina flour, we have the gamtae itself, we have water, and we have salt. Very simple.
Chris mixes the seaweed into the pasta dough.
I felt like it seasoned the dough to a point where you actually tasted it through the pasta itself. It's got a lot of umami, a lot of pop.
The pasta is then cooked in a buttery wine sauce and topped with clams.
It's right on. Got tons of umami, bright, great mouthfeel, great texture.
While Chris could opt for cheaper types of seaweed, he says gamtae's one-of-a-kind flavour is worth the price tag.
Anything's worth it in the pursuit of deliciousness.
And Chris isn't the only one willing to pay. Badar Soup provides gamtae for high-end restaurants in Taiwan, Hong Kong, Singapore, Dubai, as well as Belgium, France, and Germany. But this new demand has caused raw gamtae prices to rise. Joo-hyun says since 2020, more producers have popped up.
지금은 감태하시는 분들도 조금씩 늘어나고 또 옛날만큼 많이 나지도 않은 경우들이 있어서 원물가가 굉장히 왔다 갔다 하는데 이거는 아마 다른 해조류들도 마찬가지일 거예요. 그래서 제가 처음에 감태 시작했을 때는 감태가 예를 들어서 원물 자체가 1kg에 이건 예로 1kg에 10만 원이다. 즉 하면은 지금은 거의 1kg에 한 30만 원 정도 되거든요.
But there is a silver lining. Joo-hyun says this new market for gamtae is helping local communities in Sosan.
감태가 이제 많은 분들이 찾아주시고 또 저희도 수매를 많이 해주심으로 인해서 그 어가에서 겨울에 소득을 올릴 수 있는 큰 소득원이 됐습니다. 그동안 10년 넘는 시간 그리고 아버지의 40년 넘는 시간이 그냥 헛되게 보낸 게 아니다라는 생각이 들더라고요.
내가 못한 거 제가 이제 열심히 하고 잘하고 있으니까 좀 마음이 뿌듯해요. 바람에는 이제 우리 송 대표가 노력한 만큼 이제 국내도 그렇지만 이제 해외도 세계적으로 이제 뻗쳐서 이 브랜드를 제대로 만들어서 끌고 나갔으면 하는 것이 바람이고.
In just a few hours, these salt crystals will disappear. They are fleur de sel crystals, unique to salt marshes like this one in Bête-sur-Mer, western France. Cédric has to harvest the fleur de sel now, or it will sink to the bottom of the pond, ruining the properties that make it unique. Fleur de sel is a salt that dissolves slowly, so its taste lingers in the mouth.
Là, je vais sentir le cristal dans la bouche, je vais avoir le côté craquant sous la dent, justement.
That's part of why it sells for 230 times more than table salt domestically and for up to $420 per kilogram outside French borders. But just about every step of the process to get this salt is difficult. Before harvesting, the wind has to be perfect. And during the harvest, salt producers like Cédric need to be ready to collect the precious salt at any moment, or they won't make a profit.
Alors, le vent est un peu fort là, ce qui fait que si on laisse la fleur trop longtemps, elle va grossir et elle va couler.
Even if they seize the right moment, the salt has to dry for an entire year before it can be sold. So is it always worth it to produce fleur de sel? And why is it so expensive?
Alors là, il est 17h et on va aller sur les marais pour aller récupérer la fleur de sel. Là, les conditions sont idéales. Il fait beau, on est en milieu de saison. La fleur de sel va se former à partir du début de l'après-midi. Elle va continuer à s'agglomérer jusqu'à la fin de journée. Et du coup, en fait, c'est le vent, c'est l'action du vent à la surface de l'eau qui va permettre au sel de cristalliser. Voilà, bah là, on voit qu'il y a de la fleur de sel.
Cédric is a paludier, what salt harvesters are known as in Bête-sur-Mer. Here, the close proximity to the sea allows salt producers to easily divert water to shallow ponds, dug in blue clay. Unlike table salt, which is typically mined from underground, fleur de sel comes to the surface of the pond naturally. It's seawater that is slowly evaporating in the summer heat.
Il faut que l'eau, donc la saumure, soit suffisamment dense en termes de sel. Et ensuite, c'est le vent qui, à la surface de l'eau, va venir assécher la surface de l'eau. Et là, c'est des petits grains qui vont commencer à se former. Et au fur et à mesure qu'ils vont se former, ils vont s'agglomérer, un petit peu comme des molécules en fait, qui vont se rapprocher. Sur un œillet, on va avoir 2 à 3 cm maximum sur les côtés d'eau. Et au centre, on aura moins, on aura à peu près un demi-centimètre à 1 cm maximum. Et on va mettre de l'eau le matin et au fur et à mesure de la journée, l'eau va s'évaporer pour laisser place au cristal. Alors les métiers de paludier, c'est des métiers de passion. Hein. C'est des métiers qu'on ne peut pas faire si on n'aime pas la terre sur laquelle on est, sur laquelle on travaille, parce qu'on y passe beaucoup de temps. On se lève très tôt le matin, on se lève en même temps que le soleil, on commence à venir travailler en même temps que le soleil.
Fleur de sel literally translates to flower of salt, but there are no flowers in it. Its name is a play on words with the French verb effleurer, which means coming up to the surface.
Comme c'est à 2 cm, il y a 2 cm d'eau maximum en dessous, c'est un travail très délicat. On va affleurer la surface de l'eau pour récolter le sel. Si je soulève l'argile, du coup ma fleur elle va être toute noire. Et je ne suis pas sûr qu'une fleur de sel noire ça plaise aux gens.
Once it forms, the harvest window is very short.
Voilà, le grain est assez gros, il est assez cristallin, donc il y a une belle fleur là ce soir. Il faut être là pour la récolter. C'est pas toi qui fais le sel, c'est le temps qui fait le sel.
Anything like sudden rain or algae stuck in the water system could ruin the salt at any time.
Donc, c'est une saison qui met les organismes à l'épreuve, pour une raison simple, c'est qu'il fait extrêmement chaud. Et les œillets sont très durs à gérer parce qu'ils montent très vite aussi en température. Donc il faut en permanence surveiller, mais de surveiller de très très près son eau pour que l'eau ne monte pas trop fort en température. Parce que sinon, dans la cristallisation, c'est plus le chlorure de sodium qui cristallise, mais c'est le chlorure de calcium. Et là, on n'est plus sur du sel alimentaire.
This natural harvest method means that the salt has a high moisture content.
Alors le taux d'humidité, on va avoir un taux très très fort qui va être à 20, 30, 40% quand on va sortir le sel de l'eau. Et là, pour moi, l'hygrométrie idéale dans un sel, c'est 6 à 8%. Ça permet de garder un petit côté gras, ça permet de continuer à garder ce goût salin en bouche.
When a salt crystal is high in moisture, it doesn't contain just water.
Alors la fleur de sel, c'est toute une multitude de minéraux. D'un côté, il y a le chlorure de sodium. Le chlorure de sodium, c'est le cristal. Et à l'intérieur de ce cristal-là, on a de l'humidité. Et là, on a du chlorure de potassium, de magnésium, de calcium. Plus la saison avance, plus la salinité de l'eau va être forte. L'eau de mer, c'est 30 grammes de sel par litre d'eau. Ici, c'est 300 grammes de sel par litre d'eau.
To lower the moisture but preserve the nutrients inside the salt crystals, Cédric cannot speed up the drying process. He needs to let it dry slowly for an entire year before it's ready to be sold.
Quand tu sèches le sel, en fait, ça détruit une partie des impuretés parce que c'est séché à haute température. Mais ça va aussi détruire potentiellement les nutriments du sel. Alors qu'un sel qui est juste égoutté, tu vas avoir des petites impuretés à l'intérieur. Mais du coup, tu gardes tous les nutriments. Alors ça peut être plusieurs choses. Ça peut être soit des insectes, des petits insectes qui se sont fait attraper pendant la cristallisation. Soit ça peut être une petite herbe, soit ça peut être une petite bille d'argile. Donc tu as un peu plus de travail et c'est pour ça qu'on a un travail de tri derrière. C'est pour garder la qualité en fait du produit.
Et la différence, c'est que la fleur de sel, elle va être beaucoup plus blanche, beaucoup plus fine, plus légère, plus aérienne, beaucoup plus cristalline. Il y aura ce côté cristallin de la fleur de sel. Et c'est vrai que c'est un sel qu'on utilise quasiment que comme sel de table par rapport à sa texture, par rapport à sa couleur, par rapport à tous ces attraits-là.
This is what sets fleur de sel apart from table salt, which contains little to no moisture, but also from other wet salts that are dried naturally but have been harvested differently. Cédric wanted to be even more specific, so he started to classify his salts based on the different winds blowing here. This had never been done before. The predominant winds here blow from the west and northwest.
Alors aujourd'hui, on est en pur vent d'ouest, ça souffle assez fort. La fleur est un peu plus grossière, mais elle est souvent bien blanche. Moi, j'aime bien le vent d'ouest parce qu'il y a le côté, j'aime beaucoup le côté crunchy en fait du sel. Les vents d'ouest sont des vents de mer, donc du coup, c'est des vents qui sont plus humides. Et le grain, quand il se forme, il est plus gros parce que les pressions atmosphériques sont aussi moins fortes. Alors que les vents d'est sont les vents de terre, c'est des vents qui sont plus chauds, plus rasants, et du coup, le cristal est plus fin quand il va se former.
Là, il va y avoir en fait deux fleurs de sel différentes. Là, on a la fleur de sel de vent de sud, donc avec le grain qui est très très fin, extrêmement fin. Et là, on a de la fleur de sel qui est de vent d'ouest, avec un grain qui va être plus gros, avec plus de corps, un côté beaucoup plus crunchy en fait. Tu vois, celui-là, on ne va pas l'entendre en fait quand il va tomber. Quasiment pas, il n'y aura quasiment pas de bruit. Parce que justement, il est extrêmement fin. Alors que celui-là, avec le grain qui est plus gros, hop, on va entendre quand il va tomber.
In France, Cédric's custom salt can sell for over 10 times as much as other types of fleur de sel. Abroad, it can reach $420 per kilogram.
La fleur de sel, c'est un produit de niche parce qu'il y a beaucoup de gens, il y a beaucoup d'idées préconçues sur le sel. Il y a beaucoup de gens qui disent le sel, c'est pas bon pour la santé, alors que c'est pas le sel qui est pas bon pour la santé, c'est le mauvais sel qui est pas bon pour la santé. Après, les gens, aujourd'hui, c'est sûr que s'ils comparent par rapport à un sel industriel, ça sera pas du tout le même prix. Parce que c'est pas du tout la même activité, c'est pas du tout le même sel, donc on peut pas du tout les comparer.
His most expensive fleur de sel is this one, nicknamed Snow. A 100-gram box sells for €23. Cédric created it by studying the salinity levels in the pond, combined with a very rare wind.
Alors ça, c'est une fleur de sel neige. Cette fleur de sel, c'est une fleur de sel qui est produite par vent de sud. Les vents de sud sont plutôt rares sur la presqu'île. En général, on la fait en fin de saison et ça lui donne une texture extrêmement fine, extrêmement douce. On va en faire, certaines années, on n'en aura pas du tout. Et d'autres années, on va en faire entre 200 et 400 kg sur l'ensemble de la production. Donc c'est vraiment tout petit, c'est en termes de quantité. Ça sera un tiers plus cher à peu près, par rapport à la rareté du produit. On dirait des boules de neige. En fait, le sel est beaucoup plus compact. C'est comme il est beaucoup plus fin, quand il sèche, les grains vont s'agglomérer entre eux. C'est beaucoup plus puissant que l'autre, ouais. Et tu as beaucoup plus de longueur. Là, je vais sentir le cristal dans la bouche, je vais avoir le côté craquant sous la dent, justement, que je n'aurai pas du tout avec la fleur de sel neige. La neige va fondre, en fait, quand on fera de la cuisine, alors que la vent d'ouest va justement croquer sous la dent.
Cédric wasn't born into this job. He started harvesting salt as a hobby with friends 20 years ago. At the time, he had an office job in Paris.
C'est un changement qui est radical. Alors te dire, j'ai une société dans le domaine des ressources humaines sur la région parisienne, et demain matin, en fait, tu deviens agriculteur. C'est un changement qui s'organise, qui s'anticipe. Et ce temps de préparation, ça a été aussi le temps d'apprentissage. Et à un moment donné, tu te sens prêt, tu y vas et tu dis « Ok, stop, j'arrête de monter dans le train, je reste là et je commence à récolter du sel sérieusement. »
Today, he works with another paludier on 62 salt ponds, and he collaborates with 10 other companies on over 100 ponds.
Certains paludiers, effectivement, m'ont appris au fur et à mesure, avec le temps. C'est des gens qui m'ont donné leur savoir-faire. Et c'est quelque chose de très très noble. C'est important, c'est qu'on a une vraie valeur ajoutée en fait dans ce qu'on fait et la manière dont on le fait.
Fleur de sel is actually a byproduct of another type of salt, coarse salt.
Sous la fleur de sel, on le voit ici, il y a le gros sel qui a cristallisé directement sur l'argile.
In the pond, it's a symphony between the two.
Tu vois, là, je leur donne de l'eau pour remettre un petit peu plus d'eau à l'intérieur. Il ne faut pas travailler directement sur l'argile, sinon je vais décoller complètement l'argile. Il ne faut pas non plus surcharger en termes de volume d'eau. Si tu surcharges, après le sel ne cristallise pas.
Cédric can only harvest coarse salt in the morning before fleur de sel forms, or just after harvesting it in the late afternoon. These movements are too harsh for fleur de sel and would instantly destroy it.
Tu as une différence de couleur parce que le gros sel, il va cristalliser dans le fond de l'œillet directement sur l'argile, alors que la fleur de sel, elle va cristalliser à la surface de l'eau. Elle ne sera pas directement en contact avec l'argile.
For a paludier, coarse salt takes up most of the time at work, and also most of the harvest. For every 10 kilos of coarse salt, there is only 1 kilogram of fleur de sel. Still, because of the hand harvest method, this coarse salt remains 7 times as expensive as table salt. But Cédric didn't want to stop at the wins with his salt. He now plays with moisture to develop new flavours. His most successful creation was this one, smoked salt.
Et l'idée d'avoir le fumoir dans mon jardin, c'était quelque chose qui me plaisait beaucoup. Donc là, c'est effectivement le fumoir en fait, que j'ai construit ici. L'idée, c'était d'intégrer les 2 fumoirs dans l'espace à côté de la maison pour être tout le temps présent, parce que c'est un travail que je fais le soir. Donc comme je fais fumer le sel globalement le soir, pour pas que ça monte en température et rester toujours sur une fumaison à froid.
Cédric uses a mix of west and east wind salts that have already dried for 1 year. The salt smokes for 12 hours.
Ça, c'est le sel qui a été fumé. Ça fait une croûte sur le dessus. Regarde. Tu vois, le dessous est beaucoup plus clair. Il est moins fumé. Et après, c'est en le brassant que ça va se diffuser. Ça ne va pas changer la texture. La texture va rester la même. Et en fait, c'est l'humidité qui va absorber et après qui va diffuser.
Est-ce que je peux décrire? Ça sent le fumé, ça sent le bois en fait. Il y a deux odeurs de fumée. Tu as le côté fumé, avec justement la sciure de bois de hêtre, parce que c'est un sel qui est fumé au bois de hêtre. Et il y a un tonneau qui est fait en hêtre et qui va diffuser justement ces odeurs de bois. Ça se marie avec plein de choses. Avec le poisson, ça va donner un côté fumé. Avec une viande, ça va donner un côté barbecue. Tu peux en mettre sur une mousse au chocolat. Faut essayer, voir ce qu'on aime, ce qu'on n'aime pas. Moi, j'adore sur un fromage frais. Fromage frais, sel fumé, juste un filet d'huile. Voilà, je trouve ça très très beau.
He's now collaborating with chefs to create custom salts.
Pour moi, c'est... en fait, il y a une vraie satisfaction personnelle. Quelque part, c'est une reconnexion avec son environnement. Quelque chose qui fait du sens. Ça a du sens d'être paludier, c'est-à-dire que tous les jours, on va produire quelque chose qui va s'incarner dans le réel. Et si on fait bien notre métier, en plus, derrière, ce qu'on va produire aura une belle utilisation. Et au-delà de ça, c'est effectivement un travail ancestral. On est là pour transmettre. Aujourd'hui, nous, on le fait. Demain, ça sera quelqu'un d'autre. Et après-demain, lui-même aussi transmettra à quelqu'un d'autre.
We're in the woods of Alba, Piedmont, Italy. You can find white truffles growing in these woods and these woods only. These trees, together with the right soil and weather conditions, can only be found in this region of Italy. Together they create this, a surprisingly big truffle, as you can see, but also one with a divine fragrance. Today we're gonna go hunt for more.
To find these famous truffles, we must hunt them in the woods where they grow. And because truffles grow underground unlike mushrooms, I needed to go on the hunt with licensed truffle hunter Gianni and his two dogs, Penny and Vito.
Qui comincia la zona tartufigena, la zona dove ci sono le piante che danno il tartufo. Toyu! Lei è un incrocio, non è un cane puro, è un bracco pointer incrociato col beagle, perché sono razze più forti e potenti. Lui è un cane di pura razza, è cane per eccellenza da caccia che si usa in queste zone, è lo spinone italiano, perché comunque c'è un feeling tra me e il cane. Io oramai conosco il cane, già solo le movenze del cane, come si muove, come muove la coda, io riesco a individuare, a capire se cerca il tartufo o se nell'aria sente l'odore della selvaggina, dell'animale selvatico.
Dogs are the only ones that are actually allowed to dig into this soil. Tools like hoes and rakes are forbidden. If the soil is hard and the truffle is hidden deep down, a truffle hunter, or trifulao in the local dialect, is only allowed to use this small tool called zappino. We visited during a period of heavy drought, so truffles were mostly on the surface and there was no need to use it.
Piglia. Brava.
Ah, eccolo, che cos'è questo?
Questo è un nero. È lo scorzone. Prendi la Penny. Piglia. Gliela. C'è? Dov'è?
Che c'è, che c'è?
Sempre un nero.
Profumato.
After hunting for 3 hours, we only found black truffles. The heavy droughts this year made unfavorable conditions for white truffles to grow.
È stata una grande annata per i vini e una brutta annata per il tartufo e per i funghi, perché il vino, la pioggia fa sì che l'uva marcisca, gli acini marciscano e escano i tartufi e viceversa. Le uve quest'anno erano speciali, erano molto belle, ma purtroppo i tartufi sono molto pochi.
Despite the good news about the wine, I'm not giving up on the truffles yet.
C'è? Brava, brava. Ferma. Bianco, piccolo. Un gemello.
Ma crescono anche in coppia?
Eh sì.
Si sente già che è molto più profumato
Però purtroppo quest'anno bisogna accontentarsi. Questo c'è, questo prendiamo.
So even if a truffle hunter finds white truffles, they may not be the big ones that sell for the highest price. The harvest is unpredictable year to year.
L'anno scorso in questa zona qui le due gemelle erano una di 80 grammi e l'altra di 100 grammi. Purtroppo quest'anno sono così.
E quindi Abbiamo trovato questo bianco perché cosa c'è adesso intorno a noi?
Vedete qui, siamo in una zona così, c'è una rovere molto grande e là c'è un pioppo. Non si sa, può essere il pioppo o può essere la rovere. Uno dei due ha una radice che arriva fino qua, che sarebbe quella che abbiamo visto prima. Queste radici qua, queste micro radici, che portano al tartufo bianco. Difatti questa radice qua.
This part of Piedmont is called Lange, which means hills in the local dialect. While poplar trees and Durham oaks are favorites for white truffles, their proximity to other trees also makes chestnut, linden, willow or hazelnut trees grow white truffles. It's like the whole forest is connected as one. But even still, not all trees make truffles. There's only 1 in 1,000 chance that the tree will actually enter in symbiosis with the truffle. The ones that do produce truffles produce dozens of varieties, of which only 6 are edible. 4 black, a bianchetto, which means whitish, and the most prestigious, the white truffle. While black truffles grow year-round, the prized white truffle is seasonal and can only be collected in the fall months.
La profumazione del tartufo bianco d'Alba arriva a una profumazione maggiore perché il terreno è molto compatto, è un terreno molto marnoso, chiuso, quindi quando il tartufo arriva a maturazione ha un profumo che è diverso dagli altri, è più intenso.
After truffles get dug up, the hole is closed with soil and leaves to hide the hunter's spot from competitors, the human ones. Dogs will find it, but a well-trained dog will know that the hole is empty even if it's covered. But the main reason why the soil is covered is so the root of the tree that made the truffle won't spoil.
Il prossimo anno c'è il rischio che non abbiamo più produzione.
Perché i punti sono sempre gli stessi?
I punti sono sempre gli stessi, la zona è sempre la stessa, il giro che faccio io è sempre uguale. Cambia l'orario, cioè io lo faccio per passione, perché se per me se fosse un lavoro non lo farei perché sarebbe troppo faticoso.
Truffle hunters like Gianni usually sell their loot to local shops, which then clean and grade each truffle based on shape and weight. Normally, a truffelau collects 2 or 3 white truffles per day. So this tray right here is the daily work of 15 to 20 people. The shop we visited, Tartufi Morra, was the very first company in the region to bring the humble local Alba white truffle to the global stage in the early 1900s.
E un tartufo del genere, cioè come si fa appunto a distinguere se un tartufo è buono o insomma cattivo? Questo qui ha dei buchi.
Sì, questo ha dei buchi, no? Uno pensa, ma che brutto, ha dei buchi. No, assolutamente, se la lumaca ha la possibilità di mangiare, cosa mangia? Mangia quello più buono, giusto?
Beh, certo.
E allora, più della forma, conta sempre il profumo. Infatti io quello faccio. Quando vedo uno così, la prima cosa che faccio annuso è...
Profumatissimo. Non profuma, ha un profumo molto delicato.
Sì, perché poi dipende sotto quale pianta viene trovato, perché questo qua è un salice. Il salice tiglio è più delicato, la quercia o la rovere è più intenso, però sono caratteristiche diverse. Quindi ogni tartufo ha una storia a sé, un profumo a sé, una cosa veramente
eccezionale.
Sì, incredibile.
Once collected, a truffle has a very short shelf life, losing its aroma and flavor after a few days. This means that if you want to enjoy an Alba white truffle outside of the city of Alba, you'd have to ship it within 24 hours. Restaurants can pay from $4,000 to $10,000 a kilogram to fly these truffles across continents. The best way to preserve a truffle is to avoid washing it until the very last minute. Alessandro recommends soaking it in cold water for 15 minutes so dirt can come off easily. While black truffles have a harder skin and are cleaned with a stiff brush, white truffles need something a little bit more delicate that can gently remove dirt without scraping off the outer skin.
Sto spazzolando in una maniera più delicata di come mi spazzolo i capelli, insomma, perché proprio col terrore. Vedi, qualcosa se ne sta andando.
Una cosa particolare può essere che subito dopo il lavaggio il profumo perda un po' di profumo, ma è normale.
Cioè c'è un po', però molto meno pronunciato.
Però nel momento in cui tu aspetti 5 minuti che asciughi, poi il profumo riemerge.
Ok, quindi non è stato spazzolato via.
No, assolutamente no.
At this stage, I know you're wondering the same things I am. What is the best way to eat it and what other foods does it pair with? We'll answer all these questions in the kitchen with Chef Mikko Febrile, who traveled to Alba from Singapore to research white truffles for a new project. We joined him to taste white truffles at their fullest taste and strongest aroma.
Hai visto come te l'ho pulito bene questo tartufo spazzolato proprio come
Grande,
se fosse
grazie.
uno stivale d'epoca, quindi adesso come lo andiamo a cucinare?
Allora facciamo un primo piatto degli spaghetti di un grano antico, Khorasan, è un grano antico coltivato in Puglia, io sono pugliese.
Io sono pugliese.
Quindi utilizziamo 3 degli ingredienti principali e eccezionali del Piemonte, la fassona piemontese, la nostra nocciola delle Langhe e poi il tartufo.
E quindi come andranno tutti questi sapori poi a complementare quello del tartufo?
Allora, avremo la parte grassa della nocciola, la parte tostata della nocciola, che va a complementare anche la parte dell'umami del tartufo. E poi abbiamo la diversa consistenza con la pasta tra la parte al dente della pasta e la parte tenera della carne, della fassona. Impiattiamo. Poi andiamo a condire la fassona, solo con un pizzico di sale e l'olio.
Cosa ne pensi tu dell'olio al tartufo? Cioè, perché non condire, se tu cerchi quella consistenza, insomma, dell'olio nel piatto, perché non utilizzare l'olio al tartufo?
L'olio al tartufo è un sacrilegio, è praticamente la cosa più falsa che esista. È fatta sicuramente chimicamente.
Quindi molto
Però
meglio l'olio d'oliva. Sì.
Sempre. Senti il profumo.
Wow, che profumo.
I profumi sono ancora più forti adesso che l'hai...
Esatto, perché comunque c'è la parte calda della pasta e quindi vai ad elevare quei sentori lì.
Come si vede che tu sei lo chef e io una persona che mangia? Ci sentono un po' tutti. Avevo un po' paura che la nocciola sarebbe stata troppo forte perché l'odore era anche importante. Invece riesco anche comunque a sentire carne.
Esatto. Quindi è molto importante il bilancio, il fatto che c'è abbastanza pepe bianco e poi senti il pizzichio dell'olio, sì. Però anche la burrosità di questa carne.
Cosa trovi in questi tartufi che non trovi altrove?
Quando la stagione del tartufo inizia, e penso parlo per tutti i colleghi e insomma per tutto il mondo, per noi è festa. Il tartufo d'Alba tu aspetti ed è sempre una cosa misteriosa, no? E poi è magico, perché ogni tartufo è diverso per sapori, per sentori, per profumi, per consistenze anche. Ma il fatto che tu devi aspettare un anno, quindi una stagione, che è l'autunno, è magico, è qualcosa di speciale.
E devi venire qui per poterlo provare.
In nessun altro posto al mondo. Quella è la bellezza, quella è la cosa che lo rende speciale e unico.
52,000 ceramic jars hold a Japanese black vinegar, known as gurozu, that can only be made in this part of the world. One batch can take up to 5 years to age, and brewmasters, like Kenji Tachiwada, keep track of the quality by checking the taste, sound, and smell.
黒酢これはですね、作るには、子供のですね、子供を育てるような気持ちで、やっぱり、仕込んだ時がまだ赤ちゃんで、今度収穫する時はもう成人、立派な成人になって世の中に送り出すという。
One bottle can cost at least double the price of a regular mass-produced rice vinegar. Chefs across the country seek it out for its smooth and mellow taste.
黒酢は日本の調味料の中でも大切な一つの調味料として使用しております。
Sakamoto Kurozu is one of 8 vinegar breweries in the southern Japanese town of Fukuyama that still use this 200-year-old fermentation method. But ramping up production is nearly impossible because it's difficult to find more land to lay out jars. We travelled to Fukuyama, Japan to see how this ancient method of making black vinegar is still standing. Kenji starts his work at the Sakamoto Kurozu facility at 8 a.m. He's been working here for the past 40 years.
非常にこのやりがいのある仕事で、 楽しんでおります。今は醸造部といってですね、仕込みから、黒酢を仕上げるまでですね。
Brown rice is one of only 3 ingredients in kurozu. Workers harvest it from nearby fields.
これは私がですね、生まれ育った地元で採れたお米です。
They steam the rice and mix it with a mold that's also used to make sake and soy sauce. This is called goji, and it's the first ingredient to go in the jar.
いわば、黒酢を作るための原動力になる麹なんですね。
Genji fills up the rest with plain steamed brown rice. It makes the vinegar less tangy and acidic. Then, he fills the pot with around 9 gallons of fresh water from a natural spring.
麹の、働きを活性化させるために地下水を入れます。
A final layer of koji goes on top. It will later turn into a thick slab of mold that protects the vinegar from other microbes entering the mixture. Master brewers usually fill the jars up in the spring and fall, when the temperatures are just right.
やっぱり、先ほど言いましたけど、温度が非常に大事でありまして。
This specific region has the perfect climate to make kurozu because of its relatively warm weather year-round. The natural outdoor heat accelerates fermentation. Over a 3 to 6 month process, the mold turns the rice starch into sugar, then into alcohol. As the vinegar ages, it turns darker and richer in taste. It takes at least 3 years to reach its signature brownish hue. Genji checks all 52,000 pots to keep track of the aging.
最初に感じるのは匂いなんですね。最初の発酵の時に甘い香りがするのを確認した時にはすごく大丈夫だな、これで安心だなという気持ちです。これはもう1年前になっております。香りとか、それから色とか、それから味とかですね。それで判断していきます。
Each pot ages at its own pace, but most reach the dark brown colour in 3 years. Genji selects a few to ferment for up to 5, and those are the most expensive.
壺の蓋を開けるとですね、ほんのりと甘く感じます。その後にですね、ブクブクと音がいたします。最初は音がポコッポコッポコッという音がするんですが、もう少し発酵が進んできますとガーッという激しい音に変わります。
The company sells vinegar at all stages of aging. These ceramic pots also play an essential role in the process. Their dark exterior absorbs heat from the sun, and the porousness of the clay allows the mold to keep fermenting. Sakamoto Kurozu has been buying them from Chinjukan pottery for the past 200 years, and they last for centuries. The company still has about 1,000 original pots from 2 centuries ago.
黒酢の甕は、何千個も作ってますね。
Chinjukan is a 15th generation potter running the 420-year-old family business.
ここの焼き物は坂本の黒酢とはもう江戸時代から、長い付き合いですね。
People have been making black vinegar in Fukuyama since the 1800s. In the early 20th century, there were about 24 kurozu makers here, but many closed their doors during World War II when the government implemented food rations and restricted brewers from using rice. Sakamoto Kurozu managed to stay afloat by briefly substituting sweet potatoes for rice. Today, it's one of only 8 kurozu businesses left. It's also one of the largest, covering 35,000 square meters, the size of more than 6 American football fields. Akihiro Sakamoto is the 6th generation to run the family business.
私はその祖父がですね、非常に私は小さい頃から非常に苦労して手間がかかるんですけれども、黒酢作りやっぱり時代とともに形を変えながら未来永劫残していけるように頑張っていきたいと思ってます。
It also has a restaurant on site where visitors can taste the vinegar.
坂本黒酢の違いは、店頭で売られている安いお酢とは全く製法も原料も違うので、全然違う商品となっております。まろやかでコクのある風味が出ています。
Junichi Honda studied the best way to use vinegar in his dishes. Like miso and soy sauce, rice vinegar is one of the basic seasonings used in Japanese cuisine. It's usually aged for 3 months, and some can be ready in just days with modern technology. Kurozu's years-long natural process gives it a milder and less acidic taste than regular rice vinegar. The restaurant's sweet and sour pork is the most popular item on the menu.
こちらが自家製の1年ものの黒酢となっております。主に火を使う料理で使用しております。こちらの黒酢を少し火を入れて使用することによって黒酢の風味、コクが増し、さらに美味しい酢豚に仕上がります。
A 1,000 milliliter bottle of kurozu costs around $20. That's double the price of standard mass-produced rice vinegar. The older it is, the more expensive it becomes. But Akihiro is not worried about cheaper competitors. Japan's Ministry of Agriculture, Forestry and Fisheries certified kurozu with a geographical indication in 2015. That means authentic kurozu can only be made here in this region using these techniques. Just like champagne can only be produced in a certain region of France. And nowadays, Akihiro has chefs and customers from across the country seeking his vinegar year-round. The company expanded its line to include vinegar-based products like jam, ponzu sauce, and flavored drinks.
でさらにそれを今度坂本の黒酢を原料にして今の時代に合った商品開発をしてですね。
Customers buy kurozu for its supposed health benefits like weight loss, lower cholesterol, and increased energy. Studies suggest people who use it regularly see benefits, but usually when paired with other healthy lifestyle habits. But there's no simple way of expanding. Most of the land in Fukuyama is already taken, and moving the business somewhere else would mean losing the geographical indication. The company also needs a flat area to lay out pots, and the terrain here is hilly and steep. And there's no way of accelerating the natural fermentation process or changing the size of the pots. So for now, he's making as much as the 52,000 pots can produce.
このビジネスはなくなることはありません。この黒酢の製法では今のところライバルはありません。
And none of that is possible without veteran brewmasters like Kenji, ensuring that the quality is top-notch.
私は黒酢作りを長年やってますが、すごくこのやりがいのある仕事なんで、自分の子供たちにもですね、やってほしい、継いでほしいという気持ちはあります。
The key to real Dijon mustard is in its seeds. While other types of mustard use white seeds, Dijon is made with these black ones, which give it a tangy, sharp flavor. Named after the town of Dijon, France, very few of the black seeds used to make Dijon mustard actually come from France. But the few jars made with local seeds will cost you up to 6 times more than average Dijon mustard. So what makes real Dijon mustard different, and why is it so expensive?
Quand même beaucoup différent que les autres moutardes. Parce que les goûts, il y a la fruité, puis l'acidité, elle est bien fraîcheur. Parce qu'il y a dans le moutarde de Bourgogne, il y a de la ligotée aussi. Donc ça qui donne la fraîcheur.
The jars of Dijon mustard made with local French ingredients are sold as Burgundy mustard, the name of the region where it has been made for centuries.
C'est parti. Vous voyez, la graine de moutarde est très petite. C'est une graine qui fait moins d'1 millimètre de diamètre. Et pour produire 1 kg de moutarde, on a besoin d'à peu près 30 à 40% de cette matière première. La graine est belle.
The mustard plant is a cruciferous vegetable, like cabbage, broccoli, horseradish, and turnip. The plants are rich in pods, which are their fruit. Each pod contains several dozen mustard seeds. Dijon mustard is made with black mustard seeds, which are more aromatic than the white ones used for other types of mustard paste. They have a high level of sinigrin, which is the natural component that gives mustard its pungent aroma.
Avant de pouvoir utiliser les graines, celles-ci sont déjà nettoyées l'espace de quelques minutes pour enlever toutes les impuretés. Donc on le voit ici, on a déjà les graines qui au contact de l'eau déjà commencent à se séparer en deux phases, à savoir l'amande qui est jaune à l'intérieur et l'écorce qu'on appelle chez nous le fond de moutarde qui est brun, qui est la partie brune et qui commence à se séparer déjà.
One of the factors that sets Burgundy mustard apart from regular Dijon and keeps the prices high is that it's ground using a stone mill. This is a much slower process than using an automated steel mill. Stone mills can grind only 100 tons of seeds per day. The resulting flavor makes it worth it. It preserves the spiciness of the seed by keeping the paste at room temperature.
La pâte de moutarde reste toutefois fine, mais la diffusion des arômes se fait de manière plus importante et on n'a pas cette sensation de chauffe qui annihile à la fois le piquant et les saveurs du produit originel dans la moutarde.
To give Dijon mustard its distinct creaminess, the paste goes through a sieve, which extracts the yellow kernel from the rind.
C'est une turbine qui tourne à très haute vitesse, qui est micro-perforée, et le son de moutarde qui est plus léger va être extrait.
Dijon mustard used to be made with verjuice, a green juice made from unripe raisins, which added acidity and preserved the mustard. As the recipe evolved, producers sought to recreate its fruity flavor using a combination of white wine and vinegar. These two ingredients are still used in most Dijon mustard today, while Burgundy mustard is made with wine only. This wine comes from a local grape variety called Aligote, which carries hints of the chalky, potassium-rich soil of the region.
Et puis j'ai commencé à utiliser des moutardes chez Faro depuis plus que 20 ans. C'est-à-dire quand j'ai travaillé au Japon, j'ai commencé à utiliser les moutardes de Bourgogne. Mais malheureusement, à cette époque, il n'y a pas de moutarde de Bourgogne chez Faro au Japon. Là. Donc mon chef japonais qui téléphonait chaque fois son copain en France, donc lui qui apportera aux moutardes de chez Faro au Japon.
While the town of Dijon and its surrounding region, Burgundy, produce 90% of France's Dijon mustard, finding local seeds is much rarer. Most producers get their supplies from other countries, with Canada growing 35% of the world's supply of mustard seeds. Using foreign seeds is more convenient and can be up to 50% cheaper than using French seeds. In 2021, France produced only 4,000 metric tons of seeds, far from the 32,000 metric tons that are needed to meet the country's national demand for Dijon. Local seeds also require extra care. The use of pesticides is banned, and in recent years, late frosts in the spring have been destroying mustard crops in Burgundy.
La production de graines de moutarde en France n'est clairement pas suffisante pour répondre à l'ensemble des besoins français, et notamment pour une raison très simple, qui est le coût de celle-ci, qui est beaucoup plus important. Et c'est un peu paradoxal qu'une graine de moutarde qui viendrait du Canada.
The shortage of local seeds is part of a steady decline over the last century. But what made local farmers give up on growing mustard was a 1957 European Union policy.
politique agricole commune en Europe a orienté davantage les subventions données aux agriculteurs pour des pratiques agricoles qui étaient autres que la moutarde, à savoir le colza, qui est une plante qui est assez similaire et très proche même de la moutarde en termes d'aspect. On la confond d'ailleurs souvent, parce qu'elle a également des fleurs jaunes, mais qui n'a pas les mêmes fonctions et on ne peut pas du tout produire cette pâte de moutarde avec du colza.
The few jars on the market of Dijon mustard made with local seeds are now called Burgundy mustard. It became a protected label in 2009, similar to other products like champagne. It was launched as a collective effort by local farmers, scientists, and mills to reintroduce the crop in the region.
Ça nous semblait essentiel dans la mesure où, on l'a vu, le produit moutarde de Dijon avait un petit peu perdu de tout son sens.
Today, of the over 300 mustard mills once present in the region, only 5 remain, most of them industrial. From its very seeds to the final bottled product, Burgundy mustard is facing many challenges. Late frosts are killing both mustard plants and vineyards, making raw material even rarer and more expensive, while the ongoing war in Ukraine is driving up glass prices.
Pour le consommateur, le prix de la moutarde a augmenté mécaniquement. Sur cette année, on est à peu près à une hausse de 9% versus l'année dernière du coût de la moutarde au kilo.